Unit 1, Mind, Body, and Health. Chapter 1, The Influence of Mind over Body. Getting started. Following directions. Page 4.
For this activity, first look at the graphic in your textbook. It shows a continuum from very relaxed at the far left to very stressed at the far right. Now, stand up and move away from your desk. Find a big open space in the front or back of your classroom where you can imagine the same line going from left, very relaxed, to right, very stressed. Or, if you prefer not to stand up, you can do the activity at your desk using the graphic in your book. You are going to hear a series of sounds, each preceded by a number. Listen carefully to each sound and pay attention to your body's reaction. Does it make you feel stressed, very stressed, relaxed, very relaxed? Or is it neutral for you, that is, neither stress-producing nor relaxing? As you listen, move to the space along the line that corresponds to your reaction. If you are sitting at your desk, write the number of the sound on the line in the place that corresponds to your reaction. Then, wait for the next sound.
Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Number 7. Interview 1. The stress of teaching first graders. Personalizing the topic. Page 6.
Nancy, how long have you been teaching?
Let's see. I've been teaching for 20 years now.
20 years?
Yeah.
And have you always taught first grade?
No, actually, I've taught a variety of ages of children. I taught 3-year-olds and preschool children for 7 years, and then I taught 5th, 4th, and 1st grade at the elementary level.
So always children.
That's right.
Now, would you say that being an elementary school teacher was a stressful job?
Yes, very much so.
And what is stressful about it?
Well, the children bring a lot of problems into the classroom. Problems from home, and then there are developmental things going on with each age, too. Emotional and social.
Could you think of an example of something stressful that happens at school? You know, something typical.
Well, I guess when I'm trying to teach something new to a class of 5- and 6-year-olds, and that's about 32 students now, and you're trying to teach a new concept, and there's one disruptive child, and a lot of times lately, there's been more than one disruptive child at a time who can't pay attention and is disturbing the children around him, so it pulls everyone off track.
So that you can't teach the lesson.
Right. As a teacher, you feel it's your job to be teaching these things that are in the curriculum, and then you end up spending so much time trying to teach children how to get along in the classroom setting and how to behave and be polite to each other. And it seems like there gets to be less and less time to teach what we're supposed to be teaching.
Okay, so there's less time for teaching and more time spent on
helping children work out their personal problems.
Now, Nancy, you say that teaching is very stressful. Do you think it's more stressful than other kinds of work? Have you had other jobs besides teaching that were…
Yes, I've done office work and sales, and the big difference with teaching is that you're never really finished. I mean, when I did those other jobs, I could go home at 5 or whatever and forget about it till the next morning. But with teaching, it's never over until summer vacation.
Uh-huh.
You know, you carry around the responsibility of those children all the time.
So evenings and weekends.
Uh-huh. You are never really free of the stress of that responsibility.
How does that stress manifest itself?
Fatigue.
Fatigue? You feel tired a lot?
Yeah. I think that comes with working with young children, and the younger the children you work with, the more energy they require. I think any mother of a young child will tell you that.
So you feel tired. Anything else? Do you ever lose your temper?
Well, I have to keep my temper in the classroom. That's my job. But I do find that, now that I have a child of my own, I sometimes have less patience with him. And it's probably related to the fact that I've spent the whole day being very patient with 32 children. I have to admit that I'm a much better mother during the summer than I am during the school year.
Nancy, do you find that as a teacher you get sick more often than other people?
Definitely, especially when I was teaching preschool. Whatever cold or flu the children got, I would get too.
Because of the stress of working with little kids, or…
Partly, yeah. I really believe that stress does make you more susceptible to illness, that it weakens your immune system. Well, yeah, because, the younger the child, the closer you work with him. Physically. The kids are in your lap, in your face, and they're coughing, sneezing, and touching you. And maybe your tolerance would be higher if you weren't under so much stress. I think it's related.
Nancy, what do you do to relieve stress?
Well, I find it's very important to exercise. I go to an exercise class regularly. And also, it's been very important to me to have good friends that I can talk to when I need to.
Interview 2. The stress of being a police officer. Listening for specific information. Page 8.
Sam, how long have you been a police officer?
I've been a police officer for 25 years.
25 years? And you've had different types of assignments on the police force?
Yeah, I've done everything, from patrol to undercover work to detective work, and now I'm supervising investigations.
Sam, I think most people would say that being a police officer is a very stressful job. Would you agree?
Yes, it's definitely a stressful job.
Okay.
But of course, it depends on your assignment.
So, what's probably the most stressful assignment you can have?
I'd say patrol is the most stressful assignment.
Interesting. In what way?
Well, I guess the biggest part of the stress is the fear factor. The fear of the unknown. In patrol work, you don't know from moment to moment who you were talking to or what their reaction is going to be to just your presence. Let's say, for example, a patrol officer stops someone for a traffic violation. Now, it would seem as though that would be a very low-stress situation. But the truth is, there are more police officers injured during a routine stop like that than in any other facet of police work.
Really?
Really. All police officers are taught from the very beginning that that is a time when they must be aware of their surroundings, of what the person in the car is doing, because they could be dead before they get back to their car. People back over policemen, people shoot policemen, people jump out at policemen, different things. So that's probably the most stressful time.
I see. Sam, how about the connection between stress and illness? Do you think that there's a higher percentage of illness among police officers than in the general population? I mean, do they get more colds or anything? Is this really true?
Yes, definitely. And the stress level not only manifests itself in daily health, whether or not you're feeling well on any given day, it also manifests itself in things like ulcers, heart disease. Police officers tend to have a higher rate of heart disease and ulcers than people in other professions.
Really? That's documented?
Yes, it's documented. And also, the divorce rate among police officers is much higher.
Really? Is there something that the police department does to help you deal with this stress?
Yes, there are several programs that most police departments have in place. One is a physical training or exercise program, an established program where some part of your day is spent on some type of physical exercise. They found that that's a great stress reducer. There's also a psychological program with counseling for officers to help them reduce their stress. And there are several discussion groups. They found that sometimes just sitting around and talking about the stress with other officers helps to reduce it. So those things are available.
And what do you do, personally, to help you deal with the stress of your job?
Well, during the baseball season, I'm the biggest baseball fanatic, and I will either be reading about baseball or listening to baseball or watching baseball. Another thing I try to do is to get some sort of exercise every day. And then I work hard at keeping my personal relationships, especially my relationship with my wife, at its peak. I'm very fortunate that I have a good relationship with my wife and a good marriage. So when I come home, I can talk about my day with her and then just forget about it.
Interview 2. The stress of being a police officer. Listening for tone of voice. Page 8. 1.
I really believe that stress does make you more susceptible to illness, that it weakens your immune system.
2.
Yeah, because, the younger the child, the closer you work with him. I mean, physically. The kids are in your lap, in your face, and they're coughing, sneezing, and touching you. And maybe your tolerance would be higher if you weren't under so much stress. I think it's related.
3.
All police officers are taught from the very beginning that that is a time when they must be aware of their surroundings, of what the person in the car is doing, because they could be dead before they get back to their car. People back over policemen, people shoot policemen, people jump out at policemen, different things.
4.
Police officers tend to have a higher rate of heart disease and ulcers than people in other professions.
Really? That's documented?
Now, complete step B in your book. In your own voice. Asking for opinions. Page 10. 1.
Sam, I'd like your opinion. Which job would you consider more stressful? Police officer or supervisor?
Oh, I'd have to say that,
2.
Nancy, I'm curious to know what you think. What do you think is the most stressful job anyone could have?
Teaching. Well, I don't know if teaching is the most stressful job, but it's...
3.
Sam, may I get your opinion? What kind of work do you think causes the most stress?
I think any job where you have to deal with the unexpected
Lecture: Ellen Cash, Stress and the Immune System. Before the lecture, using telegraphic language, page 13. 1.
Think of people that you know with migraine headaches or high blood pressure, skin rashes, high cholesterol, heart disease. The list goes on and on. All of these symptoms may be related to psychosomatic disorders.
2.
We have found through research that the efficiency of the immune system is compromised, damaged by certain stressors. And we have support for this from two areas of research, both from humans and from animals.
3.
We find that today it is widely accepted in the medical field among healthcare professionals that the mind has a powerful effect on the body, and that this effect is especially negative when a patient feels helpless, when he feels he has no control.
4.
In the case of problems like headaches, sleeplessness, even high blood pressure, more and more healthcare providers are teaching patients to control these by simple relaxation techniques, which can be very effective, more effective than medication.
Lecture, Part 1, Psychoneuroimmunology, PNI, and Animal Studies on Stress. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 15.
It seems obvious that the mind will have an effect on the body, and in recent years we've gathered some hard data that this is true, that the way that you think actually affects the way your body feels. Stress has real implications in terms of what it can do to the body, and psychosomatic disorders, or disorders where there's a physical symptom caused by a psychological problem, is a real hot topic in psychology today. Because it's the border between psychology and medicine and relevant to almost all areas of our lives. Think of people that you know with migraine headaches or high blood pressure, skin rashes, high cholesterol, heart disease. The list goes on and on. All of these symptoms may be related to psychosomatic disorders. What I want to focus on today is an area of research on stress and illness, and this field is called psychoneuroimmunology, or PNI for abbreviation. I suggest that you abbreviate it. The word psychoneuroimmunology. Psycho means the mind, the way that a person thinks. Neuro is the nervous system, and immunology is the body's defenses against disease, the immune system. The immune system has two important tasks, basically to recognize foreign invaders, things that come into the body, and then to inactivate them and remove them from the body. We have found through research that the efficiency of the immune system is compromised, damaged by certain stressors. And we have support for this from two areas of research, both from humans and from animals. And I'll start with some of the animal studies. So we know that rats or mice that are placed in a situation where there was uncontrollable or unpredictable stress, for example, shining bright lights on them, or giving them electrical shocks to their feet, or overcrowding them, which, would be stressful. When these rats are infected with cancer cells and then placed in an environment like that, they're much more likely to develop cancer under these stressful conditions than if they're in non-stressful conditions. Another really important study done with animals and immune functioning was done by a fellow named Robert Ader. And Ader was actually doing a study on taste aversion in rats when he discovered, quite by accident, that he was able to condition the rats' immune systems to malfunction. Now, this has very powerful implications because if we can teach the immune system, if we can condition it to malfunction, then it makes sense that we could also condition it to get better and to heal itself without medicine. And that's very exciting. And that's where we are now in this research.
Lecture, Part 2, Human Research on PNI. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 18.
And some of the studies on humans also support this idea that the mind can control the immune system. We know that people under great stress, when we analyze some of their immune functioning, we know that right before they experience a stressor, their immune systems become compromised. For example, accountants before tax time or students before final exams. So if you think in terms of classical conditioning, like Pavlov and his experiments with dogs, in our case, the mental stress of just thinking about the exam or just thinking about being very busy at work is acting like Pavlov's bell, acting as a conditioned stimulus to depress the immune system. We find that today it is widely accepted in the medical field among healthcare professionals that the mind has a powerful effect on the body, and that this effect is especially negative when a patient feels helpless, when he feels he has no control. Elderly people in nursing homes. We know that there was one study done on nursing home residents. One group of elderly people who felt that they were in control of their lives and they made the choice to be there. Another group who felt that they were placed there by their family members and who really didn't want to be there, and they felt out of the control of the decision. Well, the ones who felt out of control were much more likely to get sick and to die, to lead unhealthy lives, while the ones who felt in control tended to be healthier. And there's another way in which the mind can exert a positive influence on the body. In the case of problems like headaches, sleeplessness, even high blood pressure, more and more healthcare providers are teaching patients to control these by simple relaxation techniques, which can be very effective, more effective than medication. So there's real exciting implications with this work, and we're just beginning to understand how powerful the mind is in controlling the body.
Unit 1, Mind, Body, and Health. Chapter 2, Lifestyle and Health. Getting started. Following directions. Page 23.
In this exercise, you are going to measure your heart rate. That is, how many times per minute your heart beats. It's very easy to measure your heart rate. You can feel it at several points on your body. For example, on your wrists or on either side of your neck. What you are feeling is called your pulse. What exactly is happening when we feel our pulse? When the heart beats, there is a short pause after each beat. During this pause, the blood is pushed through the arteries in our body. This movement of blood causes a kind of wave, and we can feel this wave at the points where arteries are close to the surface of the skin. We all know that our hearts beat faster when we are working hard physically. The reason for this is that our muscles need more oxygen in order to work, and oxygen is carried in the blood. Now let's see how our heart rates respond to the needs of our muscles. Sit quietly and relax. Just breathe normally, in and out. Take your right hand and, with the first two fingers, feel the side of your neck until you locate your pulse. Can you find it? Just keep your fingers resting lightly on your pulse. We're going to measure it for 15 seconds. When I say go, begin counting. Begin with 0, not 1. Keep counting your pulse until I say stop. Are you ready? Go. Stop. Now multiply the number of beats that you counted by 4. That is your resting heart rate. Write it down in your book where it says first heart rate. Now we're going to see what effect a little exercise will have on your heart rate. I'm going to ask you to stand up and do some movements with your arms. First your right arm, then your left, then both. Either up, forward, that is, in front of you, or to the side. After each movement, bring your arms back to your sides. Be sure that you have enough room to put your arms out to the side without hitting your classmates. Now I want you to use a lot of energy. Really move those arms, okay? Are you ready? Right arm first. Here we go. Right arm up. Now left arm up. Now both arms up. Remember to bring your arms back to your side each time. Again, right arm up. Now left arm up. Now both arms up. Now forward right. Forward left. Both forward. Again, forward right. Forward left. Both forward. Now to the side right. To the side left. To the side both. Again to the side right. To the side left. To the side both. Now both arms up, down, again up, down, again up. Again, both arms up, down, again up, down, again up. Now both arms forward, again forward, again forward. Again, both arms forward, again forward, again forward. Now to the side, again side, again side. Again to the side, again side, again side, and stop. Good work. Find your pulse on the side of your neck and let's get ready to count beginning with 0. Ready? Go. Stop. Now multiply by 4 and write down your second heart rate in your book. Subtract and find your increase.
Interview 1. Starting smoking and trying to quit. Anticipating answers. Page 25.
Pat, I understand that you used to smoke. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
When did you start?
I started when I was probably, 13, 14?
And how long did you smoke?
I smoked heavily for about 20 years on cigarettes, and then I switched to a pipe and smoked a pipe for about 5 years.
And why did you start smoking in the first place? That's kind of young.
It was cool.
Were your friends smoking?
Yeah, peer pressure, that kind of...
What did your parents say about it?
Oh, they tried to make me quit from time to time, but it never did any good.
Uh-huh. Now, how much did you smoke? How many cigarettes a day?
At the peak, 20 to 30, a pack and a half.
So now, you started when you were about 13, and you smoked for 25 years, did you say?
Right.
25 years. And, did you ever try to quit?
Oh, yes. I tried several times.
What method did you use to try to quit?
Just willpower.
Did you ever succeed for a short time?
Oh, for days at a time.
Well,
my senior year in high school, I played basketball, and my coach convinced me that I'd play better if I quit smoking. So I quit smoking for the season. And the day after we lost our last game, I started up again.
Back to the cigarettes, huh?
Yeah.
Well, so how did you finally quit?
When was that? About, 1998, I think?
1998.
Right. I had a heart attack, and they wouldn't let me smoke in the hospital.
A heart attack?
Yeah, and while I was in the hospital, my wife threw away all my tobacco and pipes, and by the time I got home, I wasn't hooked anymore.
So do you mean you've never been tempted to start smoking again?
No. In fact, I dream about it every once in a while, and it's more like a nightmare.
Ah.
I wake up thinking, oh no, I didn't start again, did I?
I'm wondering how quitting affected your health. Did you notice any big differences?
Oh yeah, I just had a lot more energy. My breathing got a lot easier. All kinds of things. Walking, biking, singing, running. My son and I were doing a lot of backpacking during that time, and that got a lot easier after I stopped smoking. Food tastes a lot better.
Did you gain weight?
About 30 pounds, I guess.
So, Pat, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to quit?
To have a heart attack? Seriously, I wouldn't. I really wouldn't.
You wouldn't give advice?
Nope. So many people gave me advice. I gave myself so much advice, and to me it was meaningless. You have to decide for some reason or another that you really want to quit, and then you will.
Interview 2, Part 1, Quitting Smoking. Paraphrasing what you have heard. Page 27.
I'm talking with Donna, a former smoker. When did you start smoking cigarettes, Donna?
I started when I was about 16 or 17 years old. It was kind of a cool thing to do. A lot of my friends would get together after school in a public park and sit around and talk and smoke and eat candy.
Did your parents know about it?
Oh no, they would have been so mad if they'd known.
How much did you, smoke? Or how many?
At first, just 5 or 6 cigarettes a day. But then soon after that, I went up to about a pack a day. And, I continued to smoke for another, 13 years. In high school, I, traveled. I lived in South America as an exchange student, and, it was very common for people to smoke there.
More so than in the United States?
Yeah, people would smoke inside movie theaters, at school, and then later I was teaching in Mexico and I would smoke while I was teaching.
Interesting.
Yeah, and students would smoke. We'd pass cigarettes around the classroom. And people smoked in supermarkets, in taxi cabs, in public buses.
So at what point did you think about quitting?
I think I started considering it really quite soon. After I probably became fully addicted a year or two after I started. Maybe a year or two after that, I started having problems with coughing, and when I was in Mexico, I started getting bronchitis. And right after I got over it, I'd get it again. I had chronic bronchitis. And, I started trying to quit then, but I just couldn't.
Now, when you tried to quit, did you try any particular method, or?
Initially, I just went cold turkey. I just decided not to buy any more. And that didn't work. So then I tried the candy method.
The candy method?
Oh, I ate candy every time I wanted a cigarette. And that didn't work.
Did you gain weight?
Oh, I never went long enough. I always started smoking again within 2 days, maybe, and it was really painful when I stopped smoking. I wouldn't sleep at night.
You mean when you were trying to quit?
I experienced withdrawal. Later, when I was pregnant, I cut back so I was hardly smoking at all, but that was really, really painful. I remember the first thing I did in the hospital after my son was born was go out in the hall and have a cigarette.
Interview 2, Part 2, How Quitting Smoking Changes Your Life. Paraphrasing what you have heard. Page 29.
I wanted to ask you, Donna, were you experiencing social pressure to quit?
Yeah, when I came back to the States, there was pressure to quit. People would really, react negatively, especially if I was around their kids.
Uh-huh.
I remember one occasion going to the zoo with other parents, friends of mine, and their kids, and lighting up a cigarette at the zoo, outside, and everyone disappeared, including my friends and my sister, and they were looking at me really negatively. My own friends and sister. They didn't want their kids around it even outside.
So how did you finally quit?
Well, I had a friend who had a 3-pack-a-day habit, and he told me about this woman who, hypnotized him, and he quit, and there was no pain at all, and so I just decided to give it a try.
And it worked?
Yeah, it worked for me. By the end of the 4th treatment, I had completely lost the urge to smoke, and it's never come back. This was like 5 years ago. I had never been hypnotized before, but it was very effective. I was really impressed.
Why do you think this method finally worked for you after you'd tried so many times to quit?
I think, it was a combination of the method and, just being completely fed up with it. I just had to reach the point where I was just ready to give up cigarettes.
Uh-huh. Now, your son, how old is he now?
He's 12.
Now, what are you going to do if he starts smoking?
He hated it when I smoked. He hated the smell. He was afraid for my health. He used to put messages in my cigarette pack in my pocket saying, "Quit smoking, Mom," so that when I'd smoke, I'd find them.
Yeah?
And so I find it really hard to imagine that he would smoke. But what would I do? Well, I would do everything in my power to educate him on the health hazards of smoking. I think any intelligent person who understands the health consequences of smoking will want to quit.
Uh-huh.
And I would like him to know that before he gets addicted.
Yeah. Now, can I ask, how do you feel physically? How did you feel after you quit?
I felt an immediate improvement in my energy level and health and my general functioning,
No more bronchitis?
The bronchitis disappeared almost immediately, and my lung function improved dramatically. But the big thing I noticed is I just had so much more energy.
Huh.
And the second thing I noticed was smells. My sense of smell came back, and I really liked being able to smell things again.
Did food taste better?
Food tasted much better. Yeah, and I didn't gain much weight. I know some people do, but I just gained about 5 pounds, and then I started exercising, so that kept my weight in control and improved my metabolism. And I've just kept exercising, so I feel so much healthier.
Anything else you want to add?
The money.
Ah.
Cigarettes are really expensive. When I quit, I calculated exactly how much it would cost to smoke for a year. And when I quit, I put the money in a savings account. And at the end of 1 year, I went out and bought myself and my son mountain bikes to celebrate our anniversary.
That's great.
And I've just kept doing that. And every year, I use the money for something active and healthy to make our lives more fun.
Interview 2. Part 2. How quitting smoking changes your life. Drawing inferences. Page 30. 1.
Well, my senior year in high school, I played basketball, and my coach convinced me that I'd play better if I quit smoking. So I quit smoking for the season.
2.
Food tastes a lot better.
Did you gain weight?
About 30 pounds, I guess.
3.
Now, your son, what are you going to do if he starts smoking?
You know, he hated it when I smoked. He hated the smell. He was afraid for my health. He used to put messages in my cigarette pack in my pocket saying, "Quit smoking, Mom," so that when I'd smoke, I'd find them.
4.
Later, when I was pregnant, I cut back so I was hardly smoking at all.
In your own voice. Asking for confirmation. Page 32.
Pat, I understand that you used to smoke. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So, now you started when you were about 13 and you smoked for 25 years, did you say?
Right. And the day after we lost our last game, I started up again.
Back to the cigarettes, huh?
Yeah. Right. I had a heart attack and they wouldn't let me smoke in the hospital.
A heart attack?
Yeah. And while I was in the hospital, by the time I got home, I wasn't hooked anymore.
So, do you mean you've never been tempted to start smoking again?
No. In fact, I dream about it.
Lecture. Christine Moore. Risk factors in cardiovascular disease. Before the lecture. Using symbols and abbreviations. Page 35. 1.
By cardiovascular disease, I mean heart attacks, strokes, and peripheral vascular disease.
2.
Males appear to be at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease than females.
3.
Obesity technically means at least 20% above ideal weight. Clearly, this puts a person at increased risk for diabetes and high blood pressure.
4.
What may be happening is that acute and chronic stress results in higher blood pressure and cholesterol levels, more smoking, overeating, etc., all of which are direct risk factors for cardiovascular disease.
Lecture. Part 1. Unalterable risk factors in CVD. Outlining practice. Page 38.
Today, I'm going to be speaking on risk factors for cardiovascular disease. By cardiovascular disease, I mean heart attacks, strokes, and peripheral vascular disease, which is also known as clots to the legs. When the arteries become diseased, there's a loss of elasticity so that the arteries are not as flexible as they used to be. There can also be partial or complete blocking of the arteries. When a person has a heart attack, what happens is there's a partial or complete blocking of one or more of the arteries which feed the heart muscle. In a stroke, we're talking about the blocking of one or more of the arteries which feed the brain. In peripheral vascular disease, again also known as clots to the legs, there's a partial blockage of one or more of the arteries to usually one of the legs. Now, there are risk factors which do give us an idea of who might develop one of these problems or these diseases. Some of the risk factors are alterable. That is, that the person at risk can actually do something about them. And then there are some risk factors which are unalterable. I'm going to run through the unalterable ones first and then the alterable ones second. Okay. The unalterable risk factors are number 1, gender. Males appear to be at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease than females, at least up until 50 years of age. The simplest explanation is that estrogen, a hormone which is made in women's bodies up until menopause, appears to protect women from cardiovascular disease. Second, age. As a person ages, their risk of getting cardiovascular disease increases. There's not much we can do about aging, but that is a factor. that the older a person is, the higher their risk for cardiovascular disease. Third, diabetes. People with diabetes have a higher rate of cardiovascular disease. It's not known why, but unfortunately, the statistics support this. And then, family history. We all have and need to have certain amounts of fats and fatty acids that our bodies use metabolically. And as long as our cholesterol and some of these other fat-containing chemicals in the blood are kept in good, low, balanced way, they create no increased risk to a person. However, if they get to be in higher levels than is healthy, they can create a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. And this is to some extent hereditary. In fact, when you hear about youngish men, let's say men in their 30s who have heart attacks or strokes, usually it's because of family history. I mean, even if they have other risk factors, having a heart attack in one's 30s is very rare, and the cause is usually hereditary. So, those are the unalterable risk factors for cardiovascular disease.
Lecture, Part 2. Alterable Risk Factors in CVD. Outlining Practice, page 39.
The alterable risk factors for cardiovascular disease include, first of all, high blood pressure. High blood pressure, again, does tend to run in families, but there are some very, very good medications that people can take that have very few side effects in order to control high blood pressure. High blood pressure often occurs in people who are obese, very overweight. But then there are many otherwise healthy people who simply have high blood pressure. And the important thing is to get these people on an appropriate medication, usually a combination of medications, and keep their blood pressure within a healthy range. And that will decrease their risk of cardiovascular disease. Next, obesity. A very high percentage of Americans are considered obese. Obesity technically means at least 20% above ideal weight. Clearly, this puts a person at increased risk for diabetes and high blood pressure. And so it's very important to get rid of that excess weight. However, if I knew how to cure obesity, I would be an extremely wealthy woman. It's a very, very complex disease process. Generally, a low-fat diet is recommended for people who are obese. Next, cigarette smoking is clearly a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. People who smoke cigarettes have more heart attacks and strokes and peripheral vascular disease, blood clots in the legs. Clearly, they have a higher incidence of these diseases earlier in life than non-smokers. Tobacco use not only raises blood pressure, but it probably affects the way fats are metabolized as well. And then, psychosocial factors. And this would include social isolation, certain personality traits, and of course, daily stress, like a high-pressure work situation. The evidence suggests that these factors put a person at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. However, more research is needed to understand how stress contributes to risk for heart disease. We're not sure whether stress directly contributes to increased risk for cardiovascular disease. What may be happening is that acute and chronic stress results in higher blood pressure and cholesterol levels, more smoking, overeating, etc., all of which are direct risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And then finally, sedentary lifestyle is the last factor to be added to the list of alterable risk factors for cardiovascular disease. People who do not exercise, even if they have low blood pressure, are not obese, do not have diabetes, are female, don't smoke cigarettes, are young, control their stress, and eat a low-fat diet, people who, even if all those factors are in their favor, if a person does not exercise, they increase their chances of cardiovascular disease. So there we go, another good reason to exercise.
Unit 2. Development through life. Chapter 3. The Teen Years. Getting started. Recording numbers. Page 49.
We all know from experience that children grow up at different rates, both physically and emotionally. Physically, gender accounts for the most significant difference in growth rates. In general, men end up taller than women, but that's not how it begins. Girls usually enter adolescence earlier. They start to get taller, and their bodies begin to mature sexually before boys do. We're going to make a graph showing typical growth patterns for adolescent boys and girls. You'll draw one line for James, a boy, and a second for Sarah, a girl. Now, to make this graph, you'll need two different colored pens or pencils, or one pen and one pencil. Before we begin, complete the key next to the graph to show which pen or pencil will be for James's growth and which for Sarah's growth. Are you ready? Look at the graph. As you listen, make points on your graph. Later, after you finish, you can connect the points with a line. We'll begin with James. When James was 10 years old, he was 4 feet 10 inches. He grew slowly until the age of 14, when he reached 5 feet 1 inch. Then he began to grow taller very quickly. By age 16, he was 5 feet 8 inches tall. By 18, he was 5 feet 11. He continued to grow taller, and by age 21, James was 6 feet tall. He reached his full adult height, 6 feet 1 inch, at the age of 22. Now take a moment to connect the points on your graph. Now you have a record of James's adolescent growth. Okay, now let's record Sarah's growth. Sarah was 4 feet 9 inches at age 10. Then she began to grow taller at a rapid rate. By age 12, she was 5 feet 4 inches. Her growth continued, and she reached 5 feet 8 inches by the age of 15. She continued to grow, but more slowly. By age 18, she had reached her adult height of 5 feet 9 inches. Now connect the points which represent Sarah's height at different ages.
Interview 1. Being a teenager in a different culture. Listening for specific information. Page 52.
Pega, how long have you been in the U.S.?
A year and a half.
And your family is here?
Yes, I'm here with my mother and my brother. My father's job is in Iran, but he comes here for vacation.
And you came here to study English after you graduated from high school?
Yes.
Okay, so you are 19. Would you say that your parents give you enough freedom to do what you want?
That is a good question. You know, in Iran, young people, at least girls, usually don't go out alone.
Uh-huh.
So if I wanted to go anywhere, usually I had to go with my parents. It's okay. It's good. You know, if you grow up with this religion, you're comfortable with that.
Yes.
Yeah, but when I came here, I saw that this was a different culture, and when I told my father that, he understood. So now sometimes he says it's okay for me to go out alone, but only if I am careful. For example, don't talk to people I don't know, don't go somewhere that could be dangerous.
Uh-huh.
I'm 19 and I know what behavior my father expects. So if I want to go to a casino, I know what my father will say, so I don't even ask.
And he trusts you to follow his rules when you go out.
Yeah. He'll say, yes, you can go, but leave your cell phone on, and if it rings, you have to pick up. So this is a good system.
Mm-hmm.
But my father still worries about me being alone. That is the one reason my mother is still here with me. My father says to her, "Pega will be lost without you. She needs you." He is always saying that. But yesterday I talked with my father and he said, "If you get your driver's license, I'm going to take your mom back to Iran with me next time I visit." So, that's great. I'm gonna start studying to get my driver's license.
Well, your dad probably misses your mom.
Yeah, exactly.
You must miss your friends in Iran.
Yeah, it's very hard when you come here, especially at my age. Before I came here, I thought, oh, I'm sure I will meet some Iranian girls. But there aren't any, and it's really hard.
Do you think that because you do not have Iranian friends here, that makes your relationship with your mother stronger?
Not really, because our relationship was always very close. Sometimes, if I am very sad, I tell my mom. Because if I don't tell her, I'll feel worse. If you talk with someone, it really helps.
So, Pega, how are American teenagers different from teenagers in Iran?
Well, one thing, in my country, children stay with their parents until they are married.
And in the U.S., they usually can't wait to move out and be on their own. What do you think about that?
Sometimes I'd like to be more independent. I mean, of course, I need my family to support me, but sometimes, I think about my father's experience. When he was 19, he came here by himself to go to school, and he didn't have any money.
Wow.
Yeah. When he described this experience to us, it sounded really bad. And 2 years later, his younger brother came to the US too, and he had to protect him. But he survived, and it gave him the self-confidence to be successful. And now he always tells my brother and me, "You have to learn to depend on yourself." He's right, I think.
So how is your relationship with your brother?
Sometimes he and I have some disagreements.
Yeah?
Yeah, a little bit, He's 3 years older than me.
Is he overprotective?
Yeah, sometimes. If I want to go out, he asks me, "Where are you going? Who are you going with?" Just like he's my dad.
So what do you say?
I say, "Dad already gave me permission, so why are you asking me?" Sometimes I think to myself, it would be so nice to have a sister.
So, when your mother goes back to Iran, what will it be like to live with your brother?
Well, actually, we already have lived alone together. My mother was back in Iran for a vacation last year, so we were alone for 2 months. He's a very serious boy, so before my mom went, I was afraid it would be terrible to be alone with him. But after she left, he was very nice.
Oh.
I didn't know how to cook, and we had to eat, so my mom would call and try to tell me how to cook things, but I wasn't very good, and the food was terrible.
But your brother ate it anyway?
Yeah, he didn't complain. And there was another thing. I cannot stay at home all the time. I need to go out every day. Maybe shopping or for a walk. But my brother's very different. He would be happy to stay home all the time. But when my mother was gone, he went out with me every day.
Because he knew you wanted to go out?
Yeah.
One last question, Pega. What are your future plans?
Well, first I want to learn English, then I want to study to be a dentist.
Ah.
Because we really need good dentists in Iran.
Interview 2. Starting a new life in one's teens. Completing multiple choice items. Page 53.
So, Anastasia, you came to the U.S. when you were 16 with your mother and...
And my younger sister.
And how old is she?
She's 13 now.
13. So, when you came here, you started high school?
Yeah, I went to high school for 1 year, but then they canceled the ESL program, and I couldn't pass my classes, like history and biology. It was really hard for me because I didn't speak English very well. So I decided to go to college to take an ESL program to learn English.
Really?
Yeah, I dropped out of high school and took an English placement test for college.
So, how was high school?
High school. It's kind of a terrible place because I think it's the same in every country because students are kind of trying to be grown up and they're still teenagers and everyone wants to look better than you and be better than you and... And also, if you don't speak English, it's kind of hard because the other students...
So the American students were...
Not the American students. The American students were very kind and patient. But students from other countries who came here maybe 5 years ago or 7 years ago...
Yeah.
And they can speak English very well, so they... Well, you can experience discrimination. Yeah. And also, in high school, a lot of students don't care about getting an education. It's like their parents said, you have to go to school. So they go to school, but they don't really want to learn. They don't concentrate, and they can sometimes distract you from learning too.
But now in college, it's different?
Yeah, the students are more serious. They want to learn. My friends and I, when we have free time, we like to sit in the library. It sounds strange, but we just sit and talk and help each other with English and math. I really like it.
So, who do you hang out with here? Who are your friends?
At first, in high school, I didn't have friends. But after a while, I started to hang out with Turkish people.
Yeah?
'Cause I feel like there's something similar in our, vision of the world or something like that. So I always hung out with them, and they helped me with my homework and my English, and now I have new friends at college.
So are your friends of different nationalities?
Yeah, several different, like Vietnamese, Mexican, Filipino, Iranian.
Any Americans?
Not yet. But I'm taking a regular math class now, and there are a lot of American people, so I think we're going to be friends.
Anastasia, when you first came here, what was it like, for you and your family? I mean, does your mother speak English?
A little bit.
Yeah, so less than you.
Yes.
So, did you find yourself responsible for...
Yes, kind of. For example, when we need to go to the bank or someplace like that. Because usually when you go to the clinic, for example, you have an interpreter. But the store or the bank, you have nobody to translate for you. And these are kind of important situations.
Yeah.
And I know that I have to, I really have to concentrate and get everything right and not make any mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. And did that start right away when you first came here?
Yeah, just after we came here.
So how did that feel, to be responsible, in a way, for your mother and sister at that age?
I didn't feel any pressure from my mom, but it felt like I'm not a teenager anymore. When I was living in Kazakhstan, I was, carefree. I had no responsibilities. But now I have to help my mom, and it's suddenly I'm an adult.
Yeah. You arrived here and suddenly you had to be in charge.
Yeah. I just have to do it.
Yeah.
I have to help my family.
Does that feel good, to be able to do that?
Yes. Sometimes I'm tired and I think, oh my God, I have a headache, but I feel like I'm really part of the family.
Yeah.
I'm kind of equal with my mom. We're friends.
She probably really appreciates your being so responsible.
Yes. She says, I'm proud of you.
Does your mother ever worry about you? For example, if you are with your friends?
It depends on which friends.
Ah,
Like, when I had friends in high school, she was always worried about me. She called me like 10 times an hour. And I said, "Mom, I'm okay, don't worry." But now she says, "You know, I can trust your friends. I can see that they are good people."
that's great.
I think moms know.
Yeah. One final question. What are your future plans?
I want to be a music producer. At first, I wanted to be an artist, but everyone said you can't make a good living as an artist in America. So I decided, okay, I'll do art as my hobby, and I'll be a music producer.
Interview 2. Starting a new life in one's teens. Uses of like in casual speech. Page 54. 1.
I couldn't pass my classes, like history and biology.
2.
It's like their parents said, "You have to go to school."
3.
When we have free time, we like to sit in the library.
4.
I really like it.
5.
I really have to concentrate.
6.
I feel like there's something similar.
7.
There's something similar in our, vision of the world.
8.
Or something like that.
9.
In Kazakhstan, I was carefree.
10.
My mom called me 10 times an hour.
In your own voice. Correcting or expressing a negative politely. Page 56.
Do you think that because you do not have Iranian friends here, that makes your relationship with your mother stronger?
Not really, because our relationship was always very close.
So when your mother goes back to Iran, what will it be like to live with your brother?
Well, actually, we already have lived alone together.
Anastasia, does your mother speak English?
A little bit.
Lecture. Susan Jenkins, Ph.D. Eric Erickson's Fifth Stage of Psychosocial Development. Adolescence. Before the lecture. Using space to show organizational structure. Page 58.
I want to mention some of the specific, more recent challenges that adolescents face in Western culture: drugs and alcohol. There's tremendous pressure in this age group to make decisions about use of drugs and alcohol and other mind-altering substances, smoking cigarettes, and so forth. And what we know now, there's been a lot of study on this in the last several decades, is that people who start using substances that have brain effects are really at a disadvantage if, just for example, if a kid starts smoking marijuana at age 12, it stops the emotional growth that comes from having to deal with experience naked. The drug acts as a protective screen between you and the reality that you're trying to learn about and come to terms with. And so for kids who use it chronically, that aspect, that line of development just stops. So when young people who, for example, use alcohol in their teens and then sometime in their 20s are able to stop using alcohol, they discover, to their shock, that they still feel like they're 15 when they started using.
This effect, this limitation of brain development, is now documented, and it makes life very difficult for these kids. Another thing that's happening now, in the last few years, has to do with the amount of information that is instantly available because of the internet and iPods and iPhones. And being able to have all kinds of distractions and instant conversations and information. And there are wonderful things about it. But also, we have no idea what the impact of that is on developing brains. We have no idea. Ever since the advent of television, this has been a point of discussion. And there has been lots of research on the impact of television on the development of child and adolescent brains. And when computer games, video games came along, it was even more of an issue because they are hypnotizing in a way that TV is not. They involve the brain in such a way that kids are really hypnotized by the experience. On its face, it's not a problem. But these are environmental stimuli that in the past were not available to kids in the way that they are today. So we don't know about the impact on developing brains and on psychological development. And again, I am not saying that they're bad, simply that we don't know about their long-term effects.
Lecture, Part 1, Adolescence, Identity versus Role Confusion. Organizational Structure, page 61.
Okay, to review, we've been talking about psychologist Erik Erikson and his 8 stages of psychosocial development. And you'll recall that each stage is expressed in terms of a conflict that ideally the developing person resolves in order to move on to the next stage. So for example, the first stage, basic trust versus mistrust, this is a process that goes on for many years. But the establishment of basic trust happens from birth to about age 2. So moving ahead, today we're looking at stage 5, roughly the adolescent period, which covers about ages 12 to 16. Erikson's terms for this stage are identity versus role confusion. And the primary work of an adolescent in the psychosocial realm is to firmly establish their individual identity. If they're unable to do this, there's a danger of what Erikson called role confusion, or not being able to make good choices, or even know what your choices are when it's very important to do so. There are a few components to this work. One of the really big challenges of this period is that this is also the time of physical and genital maturation, which is terribly confusing for kids. It hardly matters what you tell them about what's going to happen to their bodies. The experience of it and the rapidity of the physical growth is just really shocking. You may have had the experience of not seeing someone who is 14 years old for a couple of months, and when you see them again, they've grown 6 inches. And kids who are going through this are very, very self-absorbed and worried about being socially accepted. So that in the midst of this physical change, there's a demand socially and psychologically by the individual and by the people around him or her to grow up, to establish a psychological identity, ego identity, to be able to think beyond their own physical feelings, and to keep hold of that basic trust that they're going to make it through this period. And it is a really major challenge. And lots of kids hit the wall a few times before they actually feel confident and in control of their own direction. Although most kids do make it through okay. There's another material challenge that arises in this work of establishing identity, and that is making a choice about one's career, one's work. More and more kids successfully postpone this choice for a few years without too much worry by continuing their education. But even so, there's a surprising amount of anxiety that people have researched over the years in the area of career choice for adolescents. And then, another big part of this work involves the whole question of falling in love and gender identity. All of that comes way to the fore during this period. And it's important in terms of ego identity because Finding someone who you can fall in love with brings up new aspects of yourself that didn't need to be touched before. And it's quite a dramatic change. And one hopes that it's a wonderful change, but sometimes not. And in any case, very challenging.
Lecture, Part 2. Identity versus Role Confusion. New Challenges. Organizational Structure. Page 63.
I want to mention some of the specific, more recent challenges that adolescents face in Western culture: drugs and alcohol. There's tremendous pressure in this age group to make decisions about use of drugs and alcohol and other mind-altering substances, smoking cigarettes, and so forth. And what we know now, there's been a lot of study on this in the last several decades, is that people who start using substances that have brain effects are really at a disadvantage if, just for example, if a kid starts smoking marijuana at age 12, it stops the emotional growth that comes from having to deal with experience naked. The drug acts as a protective screen between you and the reality that you're trying to learn about and come to terms with. And so for kids who use it chronically, that aspect, that line of development just stops. So when young people who, for example, use alcohol in their teens and then sometime in their 20s are able to stop using alcohol, they discover, to their shock, that they still feel like they're 15 when they started using. This effect, this limitation of brain development, is now documented, and it makes life very difficult for these kids. Another thing that's happening now, in the last few years, has to do with the amount of information that is instantly available because of the internet and iPods and iPhones, and being able to have all kinds of distractions and instant conversations and information. And there are wonderful things about it, but also, we have no idea what the impact of that is on developing brains. We have no idea. Ever since the advent of television, this has been a point of discussion. And there has been lots of research on the impact of television on the development of child and adolescent brains. And when computer games, video games came along, it was even more of an issue because they are hypnotizing in a way that TV is not. They involve the brain in such a way that kids are really hypnotized by the experience. On its face, it's not a problem. But these are environmental stimuli that in the past were not available to kids in the way that they are today. So we don't know about the impact on developing brains and on psychological development. And again, I am not saying that they're bad, simply that we don't know about their long-term effects. Another thing to realize about adolescents is that they are experiencing their first true autonomy, being able to go out on their own without adult protection all the time. And they are seeking stimulation. It's not as if they're trying to be careful. They are trying to be stimulated. They will take risks, and they will seek stimulation until they either have a problem, or a car wreck, or come to their own realization as to what they need to focus on and what they need to do. And this is a normal, necessary process at this age. But what is different today is that there are these new ways to become involved in stimuli that may not be helpful and could be harmful.
Unit 2. Development Through Life. Chapter 4. Adulthood. Getting Started. Recording Numbers. Page 66.
Listen as I ask 8 friends of mine what age they think is the best age to be. Complete the information in the chart as you listen. Bruce, how old are you?
28.
28. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the best age? The best period in life?
For me, it's these years, late 20s, I think.
Yeah? Late 20s?
Yeah.
Julie, may I ask how old you are?
I'm 25.
25. Okay. And may I ask what you think the best time of life is, for you, in your opinion?
I think the best time of life is when you're a little child.
Oh,
The ages 4 through 8 or so. 8 or 9.
huh. Anne, can you tell me how old you are?
I sure can. I'm 57. I always have to stop and think.
57. Okay. Well, what I wanted to ask you about today was what do you think is the best time of life? The best age to be?
Oh, the best age to be? Oh, wow. That's a great question. Definitely not a teenager. I think the worst time, if you'd asked me that, was 12, 13, 14, 15. I think that's the most difficult time. The best time, I think, is probably maybe in your 30s?
David, may I ask how old you are?
40, almost 46.
And the question I want to ask you is, what do you think is the best age to be? Or do you have an age that stands out in your mind as the best age?
Well, physically, I'd like to be, somewhere in my 20s. But mentally, I think I would probably have to say I'm happy to be the age that I am.
Otis, can I ask you how old you are?
70.
Okay. And my question is, what do you think is the best period of your life? What's the best age to be? What was or what is or what will be?
Oh, golly, I have to think about that. The best period, well, professionally, I think the best for me was like 25 years ago, 30 years ago.
Gene, what's your age?
71 last week.
Okay. And Lori, how old are you?
I'm 68. 69 next month.
Okay. And so the question I want to ask is, what is the best age to be? How about you, Lori?
To be the age you are is the best age to be. So I love the age I am right now.
Well, were there any periods in your life that you enjoyed more than others?
Yes. My 40s were wonderful.
And Gene, how about you? What do you consider the best age to be for yourself? The best period in your life?
Well, gee, I don't know.
Lolita, first I want to ask you, how old are you?
I'm 77.
Okay, 77. And the question I want to ask you is, what do you think is the best age to be for you?
Well, I look back at special times in my life. And, the period between graduation from college and getting married was wonderful for me.
Survey, Part 1. The best age to be. Responding to true-false statements. Page 68.
Okay, Bruce, why is the late 20s better than, say, earlier 20s?
I think that when you're in the early 20s, you're just getting over teenage adolescent years. So now I think in the late 20s, you kind of know a direction, but the early 20s are you just kind of remember too many things of the teenage years, and you're still trying to get a plan. But in the 20s, late 20s, you kind of know what you want to do, and you kind of have an idea of how to get it. And you know how to settle down, too. You can see a plan for getting things and also settling down.
Is there a time in your life that you think you would call the most difficult time?
Probably the teenage years, like 14, 15.
Yeah.
16.
The mid-teens.
Yeah, I think the mid-teens were the worst.
So, Julie, why would you like to be a little girl again?
I think lately, because the age I'm at now, I feel is kind of a stressful age.
Huh.
When you're younger, you don't have as many worries and responsibilities.
Yeah.
You don't have all the stresses of life as an adult.
I think at the age I'm at now, when you get out of college and you need to find a job,
Uh-huh.
and I'm single and I can't depend on my parents anymore,
Uh-huh.
and I have new responsibilities, just trying to get used to having new responsibilities, and also figure out what I want to do. There's lots of decisions.
Uh-huh.
I don't always know what the best thing to do is. Those are things that I need to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, Anne, why was being in your 30s good?
Because in your 30s, you pretty much know what you like and what you don't like, and you're kind of settled into life. And at least for me, that was a really good time. Actually, now that my sons are married and they're independent,
Uh-huh.
when I come to think about it, I probably do more interesting things now for myself than I did when I was in my 30s.
Huh. For example,
Well, now I'm playing in an orchestra, which I would never have had time to do when the boys were little, and I read a lot more than I did.
do you and your husband go out more?
Ha! We do. We do. We go out to movies and we go out to dinner, and we hope to be able to travel.
Survey, Part 2. The best age to be. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 69.
So, Otis, professionally, your early 40s were your best time, you say?
Yeah. Well, actually, I would say maybe from 35 to about 50.
Why was that?
I was much more receptive to new ideas. I lectured better, I read a lot more, and I was very interested in doing certain things in a different way.
Uh-huh.
Because when I was 50, actually, is when I created about 4 courses that had never been taught at the university here before. I'd just come to the university and I created all those courses and taught them regularly, and most of them worked.
That's great.
But I think in terms of feeling mature and responsible and sensitive to the world around me, I think the last 10 years have been the best.
Okay. So, what was so wonderful about your 40s, Lori?
Well, I had basically educated myself, 'cause I got my master's degree during my 40s, and that was a very exciting time. I really enjoyed that a lot. And, my children had grown up, so I was beginning to feel free of a lot of my responsibilities and commitments, and I could focus on my own work, which is painting. And I also started studying music, which was really great, 'cause I hadn't done that before. And I met some wonderful people. It was a beginning.
So, Jean, you say you don't know what age is best, but is there any period in your life that you really loved more than others, or...
The older I get, the more I think about when I was younger. But that's probably... I think the older you get, the more you think about your youth.
And the more...
At least when you get past a certain age.
Yeah, and the more you value it, the more you miss it?
Yeah. You know, when you're younger, you can't wait to grow up. And when you're old, you think, what an idiot I was. And I should have understood that there were things that weren't quite so bad then, you know. But you don't know when you're younger. For instance, you get up and you feel terrific, you know, and you just take it for granted. But when you're older and you wake up, I mean, you don't feel so well, you know. I mean, your bones hurt and your joints hurt, and you gotta kind of, it takes a mental effort to get, and sometimes it takes Lori and I always talk about how long it takes to get going in the morning, you know. In the Army, we used to get up and 10 minutes later we were out on the parade field. And now, when we get up, we gotta do our exercises. Then we gotta do our walk. Then we gotta do our bath. I mean, it's like our job now. We don't have time to work anymore.
Survey, The best age to be. Uses of get. Page 69. 1.
I think that when you're in the early 20s, you're just getting over teenage adolescent years.
2.
You can see a plan for getting things and also settling down.
3.
When you get out of college and you need to find a job,
4.
just trying to get used to having new responsibilities.
5.
I think the older you get, the more you think about your youth.
6.
For instance, you get up and you feel terrific.
7.
Lori and I always talk about how long it takes to get going in the morning.
Lecture. Anthony Brown. Developmental tasks of early adulthood. Before the lecture. Paying attention to signal words. Page 74. 1.
By developmental tasks, I mean life changes that a person must accomplish as he or she grows and develops.
2.
Ideally, what's considered optimal at this point is for the young adult to be capable of supporting him or herself completely. That includes financially, emotionally, and socially.
3.
One of the major tasks for young adults is the development of a new and different type of relationship with parents. That is one based on mutual adulthood.
4.
The current economic climate in the world has made that much more difficult to achieve. And the result is that we see a lot more young adults living with their parents.
5.
So, as I said, it can be difficult for young adult children to establish financial independence from their parents.
6.
Of course, separation is the natural thing for adult children to do at this point, to leave their parents and start their own lives. But even though it's natural, this is still a crisis point in a family when a child leaves.
7.
So, we've talked about two of the important tasks of young adulthood.
Lecture. Part 1. Separation from parents. Listening for specific information. Page 76.
I'm going to speak about two of the major developmental tasks of young adulthood. And by developmental tasks, I mean life changes that a person must accomplish as he or she grows and develops. The young adult is in his or her early to mid-20s. And at least in Western culture, this is the time for the achievement of independence from parents. Ideally, what's considered optimal at this point is for the young adult to be capable of supporting him or herself completely. That includes financially, emotionally, and socially. Okay, so we can say that one of the major tasks for young adults is the development of a new and different type of relationship with parents. That is one based on mutual adulthood. Now, this is the sort of culmination of a long process of separation that starts in early childhood, and ideally in young adulthood. And the child physically separates and goes his or her own way in the world. Interestingly enough, this is a change that is happening later in life in today's world, partly because it depends on the child's ability to become financially independent. And the current economic climate in the world has made that much more difficult to achieve. And the result is that we see a lot more young adults living with their parents, well into their 20s. So, as I said, it can be difficult for young adult children to establish financial independence from their parents. And then establishing emotional independence can also be a difficult process. And not all children separate from their parents with equal success. Some children may never be successful at this. They may be forever in the role of child, and the parent forever in the role of parent. Of course, separation is the natural thing for adult children to do at this point, to leave their parents and start their own lives. But even though it's natural, this is still a crisis point in a family when a child leaves, and some families don't handle it well. Change is a frightening thing for many people, but there's no escaping it. We all have to learn how to change throughout our lives.
Lecture, Part 2. The Crisis of Intimacy versus Isolation. Listening for specific information. Page 78.
And then there's a second task of young adulthood, which ties into this whole business of getting married. Erik Erikson identifies the period of young adulthood as a time when the young adult faces a crisis of intimacy versus isolation. Well, the theory is that in adolescence, the child has developed a healthy ego identity. And of course, in reality, for a variety of reasons. Many people fail to develop this healthy identity in adolescence. But again, ideally, then in young adulthood, this identity is ready and able to be joined with another, traditionally in marriage. This involves the ability to make a commitment to someone in a close, intimate way. Now, according to Erikson, healthy people during this period are able to compromise, to sacrifice, to negotiate, all of which one must do to make a marriage successful. This then, as I said, is the second major developmental task of this period. The ability to adapt to another person in this way will increase intimacy or closeness and connection. If this isn't achieved, the result is isolation, or in other words, a kind of avoiding of being in the world. Other people experience this as self-absorption. And we've seen, for example, someone who is a really accomplished research chemist, but they spend all their time in the lab, and their family is estranged. And this isn't a natural choice for a human being. We are built to be in groups, and people who isolate themselves often have excellent reasons for doing so, but the reasons are negative. So there is a fear of losing themselves or being hurt if they open up and are vulnerable to other people. So there you have intimacy or isolation. And the challenge for the young adult is to resolve that crisis. And as I said, success depends on the young adult having developed a solid, healthy identity in adolescence. It's difficult to give yourself to another person in a relationship if you do not have a self to give, if your self is not defined, if it is not solid. And it puts great emotional stress on a relationship when two people are trying to deal with the developmental tasks of marriage, when they haven't yet dealt with the important developmental task involved in just being a separate person. That, ideally, should come first. And that brings me to an interesting point about marriage today. And that is that increasingly, in the West, people who in the past might have felt pressure to marry in their early 20s, right out of college, now tend to stay single for a longer period of time. With this is the freedom, for example, to take more risks, to move to a different part of the country or to a different part of the world. And there is also with the divorce rate as high as it is, a certain reluctance, a skepticism about marriage as an institution. As a result, many young adults are waiting to get married until their late 20s or older. And in fact, the statistics show that couples who do wait till their late 20s to get married have a much lower divorce rate than those who marry in their early 20s. So we've talked about two of the important tasks of young adulthood. The first, separation from parents, which involves renegotiating one's relationship with parents. And the second, solving the crisis of intimacy versus isolation. That is bringing a solid sense of oneself to a relationship with another person. And the degree of success with which the young adult accomplishes these tasks will determine to a great extent their future success and satisfaction in life.
Unit 3, Nonverbal Messages. Chapter 5, Body Language. Getting started. Reading nonverbal cues. Page 88. A.
Hello.
B.
Shh! Quiet!
C.
No, I am not interested.
D.
I don't know. I have no idea.
E.
Could you come here?
F.
Good job!
G.
I am not telling the truth.
H.
Wish me good luck.
Interview 1. Brazilian Body Language. Responding to true-false statements. Page 90.
Marcos, how many years have you lived in the United States?
I was a student here for about 5 years, and then I went back and lived in Brazil for a while, and then I moved back 8 years ago.
Okay, and what I wanted to pick your brain about was body language and things that you might remember noticing when you came here. Things that North Americans do differently from people in Brazil. For example, eye contact. Is that something you noticed?
Well, there is a big difference. I've learned that North Americans are much more, how can I say this? It's very important for them to have your eye contact so that they know that you're with them in the conversation, that you're paying attention and so forth. And what I've noticed about myself is that my eyes tend to wander in the distance and go to other places, and I've had people think that I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah?
But I was just trying to focus.
Trying to focus. That's interesting. What about hand movements? Have you noticed a difference between Brazilians and Americans?
Well, that's an interesting story. A part of my family in Brazil, well, these are people who were part of my first wife's family, and they were from Italy.
Uh-huh.
And they talked with their hands a lot, and we had always noticed it, but we never thought that we did the same thing as Brazilians.
Oh.
But on observing how seldom people here seem to make gestures, I've become more aware of the fact that Brazilians do indeed talk a lot with their hands.
Uh-huh. Well, what about the kinds of gestures we use? I mean, to signal certain things. Have you ever completely misunderstood a situation because of an unfamiliar gesture?
Well, a case comes to mind. This was when my wife and I were living in Brazil, and we...
Now, your wife's North American, is that right?
Yes, she is. And we were at a party one day at school, and we were standing quite far apart from each other. And she put out her right arm and started opening and closing her hand. And in Brazil, what that means is come closer. So I kept coming closer, and she turned around and walked away, and I was very confused. And later I asked her, "Why did you keep calling me if you didn't want to talk to me?" And she said, "I wasn't doing any such thing."
Ha!
So I repeated the gesture to her, and what she meant to do was kind of wave at me. But that's not the way Brazilians wave. But it must have been very funny to the students that were watching because I kept walking towards her and she kept walking away.
Interview 2. South Korean body language. Responding to true-false statements. Page 91.
Sunran, let me just ask, first of all, how long have you been in the United States?
10 years.
10 years. Okay, well, can I ask you, are there any American hand signals that gave you trouble when you first came to the United States?
Well, yeah. The way you say, come, we do that kind of hand signal for a dog, not for people.
Oh, with your palm upward? That's for calling dogs in Korea?
Yeah.
That must be shocking for Koreans who come here. What about eye contact? Is that different in Korea? Is it okay for people to look at each other directly?
Well, not a higher level person. I mean, if I talk to my boss or to an older person, I should look at his mouth or chin, not in his eyes.
Really?
And boys and girls, if they look in each other's eyes, it means they are interested.
Oh, so you shouldn't look directly at someone if you're not interested?
No, but I've been in the US for 10 years, and I think maybe Korea has changed a little this way.
How so?
I think boys and girls in Korea use more eye contact now. Before, boys and girls went to different schools, but now they can go to the same schools.
So they have much more contact with each other?
Yes.
I see. What are some other differences in body language between Korea and the US that you've noticed?
I find Americans tend to make a lot of facial expressions when they talk.
Oh.
I think Koreans use less body language when they communicate.
Oh.
It's considered more polite to stand still, sit still, try not to move anything.
That's true for men and women?
That's both men and women.
Well,
in the past in Korea, when you moved your body a lot, like crossing your legs or crossing your arms, it was kind of a sign of, bad manners.
Well, that's interesting. Now, you've been here for 10 years. Have you changed? Do you use your arms more now than when you're talking or your hands?
I use my arms and hands a lot of body language. Yes, I do.
More than you would if you were speaking Korean?
Right. I think it is changing a little now. So Korean people use more body language. But older Koreans still have this idea. So when I visit Korea, especially when I talk to my older relatives, I try to minimize that.
Are you able to do that?
Not so well. They always say, "How come you move so much? How come you don't sit still?"
Interview 3. Japanese body language. Restating what you have heard. Page 92.
Irie, let's see, how long have you been here?
12 years.
Okay, and you came here with your husband, who's American.
Yes, he's American.
So I wanted to ask you if you've ever had any misunderstandings because of differences in gestures that Americans use, or maybe eye contact, or...
Ah, yes. I had an experience like that just after I came here. I participated in my husband's my sister-in-law's wedding.
Uh-huh.
And after the ceremony, we took a family picture.
Uh-huh.
Like a formal portrait. This is it.
Oh, you have it here.
Like everyone is smiling with, open mouths.
Yeah, teeth showing.
Yeah, except me. And when I saw this picture, I felt really embarrassed.
Huh.
My husband's mother asked me, "Why didn't you smile?" So I said to her, I did smile. The Japanese way.
Oh, so that's a cultural difference.
Yeah. In Japan, in this situation, like a formal portrait,
Uh-huh.
we usually just make a smile with our mouth, but we don't open our mouth.
I was also wondering about eye contact. I've heard that too much eye contact in Japan is a bad thing. Is that true?
Well, I don't think... No, it's not bad. I think it's good in Japan also. Good to look at each other.
Oh.
Like you're really listening to the person, really trying to understand.
Are there any differences in eye contact that you've noticed between Japan and the US?
No, I think it's almost the same.
What about other differences that you've noticed?
Well, Americans use more like body language, like hand signals when they talk.
So, gestures.
Yes, and they use different gestures. Like this gesture for so-so, sort of. We don't have that in Japan. Yeah.
So the gestures are different, but there are also more of them.
That's right.
Now, you have been here for a while, and also your husband is American.
Yeah. So I think I use my hands a lot.
More than typical?
Yeah, especially when I first started dating my husband and we couldn't communicate very well, so I really wanted him to try to understand.
Yeah.
So I used my hands all the time.
You used everything you could.
It was like, please, please understand me.
Determining which way this or that is pointing. Page 93. 1.
There is a big difference. I've learned that North Americans are much more, how can I say this? It's very important for them to have your eye contact.
2.
You were trying to focus. That's interesting. What about hand movements?
3.
Have you noticed a difference between Brazilians and Americans?
Well, that's an interesting story. A part of my family in Brazil, they were from Italy.
4.
Now, your wife's North American, is that right?
5.
She put out her right arm and started opening and closing her hand, and in Brazil, what that means is come closer.
In your own voice, using your body to communicate. Page 96.
I think I use my hands a lot.
More than typical?
Yeah, especially when I first started dating my husband and we couldn't communicate very well, so I really wanted him to try to understand.
Yeah.
So I used my hands all the time.
You used everything you could.
It was like, please, please understand me.
Lecture. Ellen Summerfield. Body language across cultures. Before the lecture. Mapping. Page 98.
Maybe we should begin by mentioning an obvious one. That's what we call body language. That is, what we are saying by our posture, the way in which we hold ourselves, our gestures, that is, use of our hands, our facial expressions, all the things that say something to the other person, not through words, but simply how we present ourselves, how we move. Let's see. Our eye contact, for example, is one that we may not think of right away, but it's extremely important, and our tone of voice. How about the meaning of touch? Touch communication, that is, who has permission to touch whom and under what circumstances?
Lecture. Part 1. Aspects of body language. Mapping. Page 99.
Okay, today we're going to begin our discussion of nonverbal communication. Now, experts in the field of communication estimate that somewhere between 60 and 90% of everything we communicate is nonverbal. How can that possibly be true? After all, we put so much emphasis on our words when we're trying to communicate something. We think about what we want to say. We worry about what we didn't say. We think about what we should have said. I mean, we're concerned about how the other person interprets our words, and we interpret the other person's words. So, there's enormous emphasis in all our interactions on words. What about this 60 to 90% that is supposedly nonverbal? What does that mean exactly? Okay, let me ask you to think about some of the ways in which you communicate nonverbally. Just the broad areas. Maybe we should begin by mentioning an obvious one. That's what we call body language. That is, what we are saying by our posture, the way in which we hold ourselves, our gestures, that is, use of our hands, our facial expressions, all the things that say something to the other person, not through words, but simply how we present ourselves, how we move. Let's see. Our eye contact, for example, is one that we may not think of right away, but it's extremely important, and our tone of voice. How about the meaning of touch? Touch communication, that is, who has permission to touch whom and under what circumstances. A very important point that I'd like to make is that nonverbal communication is difficult enough to study and understand in one's own culture. But it becomes extremely complicated when we are trying to understand how nonverbal communication functions in another culture. That is, one we're unfamiliar with. I mean, after all, if we're learning about another culture and learning the language of that culture, another language, what do we learn but words? The meaning of words and how they fit together and the pronunciation of words. So that when we learn French, we can take our dictionary and look up fromage. Or when we learn German, we can find out what Käse is. But there's no dictionary of nonverbal communication. So, where do we find out what a certain toss of the head means, or a certain blink of the eye, or the physical distance between people? It's very easy to misinterpret these cues or to miss them altogether. If you're puzzled by what's happening to you in a foreign culture, it's probably the nonverbals that are causing the communication problem.
Lecture, Part 2, Cross-Cultural Misunderstandings. Mapping, page 100.
So, the nonverbals are probably responsible for most cross-cultural confusion. Let's see. Let me give you one or two examples of how this can happen. A simple one is with eye contact. Americans tend to think that looking directly into another person's eye is appropriate, and that if you look away or you look down, you may be avoiding responsibility or showing disrespect. And this is considered to be negative. We learn to look me straight in the eye. Look me straight in the eye. Now, in some other cultures, it's a sign of disrespect to look at another person straight in the eye. In Japan, for example, there's much less eye contact than in the United States. So something as simple as that can cause great confusion. To give another cross-cultural example from Japan, I can tell you that when I first began working in Japan, I was awfully confused because I was paying attention to what was said to me rather than to the nonverbal cues. We have a study abroad program, and when I was dealing with my Japanese colleagues, I would often ask questions, that had to do with the program for our students. And I would ask one particular colleague if we could make certain changes. Now, I have great respect for this colleague, and I know that he wanted to cooperate. There were times when I would ask him things like, for instance, can we allow students in the dormitory to stay out later at night? And often the response I would get verbally was that maybe we could do that. And I always interpreted this as a green light, as a strong possibility. Because maybe, for me, verbally means maybe. Yes, probably, let's find a way. After all, he hadn't said no. What I didn't understand was that for my colleague, who didn't want to embarrass me by speaking the word no directly, which would be considered impolite in his culture, he was telling me no by saying maybe, and giving me other cues with his body language. And I had to learn to recognize what those cues were. Well, can you imagine what they might be, for example? Well, I started to realize that it had to do with how he said maybe. It had to do with his tone. Whether he said, well, maybe, meaning maybe, yes, or maybe, meaning maybe not. It had to do perhaps whether he looked embarrassed or whether he looked uncomfortable when he said that, or whether he seemed excited about the idea or not. Or maybe how his posture, his body posture, how he held himself. I had to start observing those things. Now, I'll admit to you that it's still very difficult for me because I don't understand the nonverbal cues in Japanese society as well as I might understand them here in my own culture. But now I'm much more aware that I have to pay attention to them and that I have to learn to observe them more carefully. And you know what? That's probably the most important lesson of nonverbal communication. That is, we have to pay attention, to observe closely what is happening both in our own patterns of communication and in those of the people around us. And that this really deserves our study and our attention. I mean, it's not only extremely interesting, but it's so important if we want to understand the more hidden sides of communication.
Unit 3. Nonverbal Messages. Chapter 6. Touch, Space, and Culture. Getting Started. Recording Information. Step B. Page 103.
Social distance varies depending on the situation. Research has identified 4 different zones, or distances, that are common for North Americans. For each zone, there is a wide range, depending on personality. The first zone is the public zone, which is usually more than 12 feet or 3.6 meters. This is the distance we like to keep between ourselves and other people when we are walking, for example. Of course, in a crowded city, this isn't possible. The second zone is the business social zone, which averages 6 feet, or approximately 1.8 meters. This is a good distance for talking in a public place with people we don't know well, for example, in an office. The third zone is the personal zone, which averages 1 foot 6 inches, or 46 centimeters. This is a comfortable distance for North Americans having a conversation with a friend. The closest zone is the intimate zone, less than 18 inches or 50 centimeters. This zone is for romantic partners, but it can also be used as a way to threaten a person, to say, "I am stronger than you, and I can attack you."
Recording Information. Step C. Page 103.
Social distance also varies depending on one's culture. The following averages for the personal zone have been identified for North America, Western Europe, Japan, and the Middle East. The average North American is comfortable with a personal distance of about 46 centimeters, while in Western Europe, the comfort zone for personal interactions ranges from 36 to 41 centimeters. Japanese prefer a much greater distance, approximately 91 centimeters. In contrast, personal distance in the Middle East is much closer, approximately 20 to 30 centimeters.
Interview 1. Marcos, Touch and Space. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 106.
Marcos, do Brazilians stand close together when they're talking?
Oh, much closer than North Americans, yeah. Yeah, I've had several interesting cross-cultural experiences with this. One time I was in a classroom. I was talking to a student of mine about some assignment. It was after class, and I kept... he was a gentleman from Korea, and I kept getting closer to him, and he kept backing up.
Oh, dear.
And I didn't really realize what was going on until I saw this look of total despair on his face, and I realized that he had backed up the whole length of the classroom, and now we were in one corner of the room.
Really?
He looked very uncomfortable, and I had obviously invaded his body bubble, his space.
Yeah. Huh. How about touch? Do Brazilians touch each other more than North Americans?
Yes, in Brazil, it's really common for people who are talking to you to stand really close and to touch you often, or to put their arm around you or something, depending on who it is.
Now, this is touching between male and female?
Let's see. Yes, male, female, but I also think it's not uncommon for male friends to touch each other, say to put an arm around the shoulder or something.
Uh-huh. Have you found that you've modified your bubble, your space to accommodate us, cold North Americans? Do you stand farther away from people now and maybe not touch people as much?
Yes, and I think it's a partly unconscious process. You just modify. I mean, if you don't, then when you're standing in line, you get too close to people, and then they turn around and they stare.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I feel that I have had to enlarge my bubble.
Yeah.
And stand a little farther than I would. And I've noticed in my family, too, I've noticed that when we lived in Brazil, we were much more physical, or walked more closely, or touched more often in public than we do here.
Interesting.
I think especially between my wife and me this has happened because it's when one looks around and there aren't very many people touching each other in public, then one feels a little self-conscious.
Interview 2. Sunran, Touch and Space. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 107.
Sunran, have you noticed big differences in how people touch in the U.S.?
Well, one big difference is shaking hands. Men and women in Korea don't usually shake hands, so I had to learn to do that when I came here.
Uh-huh.
So the first time I went back to visit Korea, I forgot. And I tried to shake hands, and they don't do that. So I was kind of embarrassed.
Do people in Korea touch at all in public?
Well, in Korea, we kind of tend to show more affection to the same sex than the opposite sex. So as friends, not as a partner.
I see.
So like, if I have a girlfriend, it's normal to walk around hand in hand or arm in arm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I did that a lot in Korea, but I can't do it here in the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And here, men and women show a lot more affection than in Korea.
Men and women?
Yeah.
Is it wrong in Korea for a man and woman to touch each other in public?
You're not supposed to.
Ah, interesting. Even if they're married?
Yeah. The first thing that kind of came as a real shock to me when I arrived here was kids, high school kids. They hug and kiss at school. That was a real shock to me. And little boys and girls, they have their first kiss when they're, 6 or 7. That's strange, too, because we never did anything like that until we were older, maybe 20s.
Now, Sunran, you've been here for about 10 years, right?
Yes.
And you've been back to Korea recently, haven't you? Do you think anything has changed?
Yes, I was in Korea last year, and yeah, it is a little bit different now from when I lived there. For example, I think people shake hands more now. But it's still not very common for a man and a woman to shake hands.
Any other differences that you noticed on your last visit?
Well, yes, I was in Seoul, and I saw some young couples on the street, touching or holding hands.
Hugging?
I didn't see hugging, just touching. So maybe in the big city it's different now from before.
Interview 3. Irie, Touch. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 108.
Irie, what about differences that you might have noticed in space or in how Americans touch each other?
Yeah, I think many Japanese have the same opinion about hugging.
Yeah?
Hugging and kissing. In Japan, at the beginning of our relationship, my husband,
Yeah?
he was confused because my family would never hug him, much less kiss him.
Huh.
Yeah, my mother never touched him or, so he worried. Maybe she doesn't love me.
Interesting.
Yeah, and also, he couldn't communicate with her very well, so he felt really confused and nervous.
Yeah, because in the US, if you can't talk, you can at least put your arm on someone to show them.
Yeah, show love.
Communicate that way. Huh. So you say your parents didn't hug or kiss him. Did they hug or kiss you? I mean, within your family, in Japan, do people hug each other? Like, did your mother hug you?
No, I think never. When I was a child, maybe she did.
Yeah?
But no, not after that. We just communicated by words. Sometimes we shake hands, but never hug.
Huh.
Now I can understand how my husband felt.
Yeah?
Yeah. Since I came here, I've come to understand his feelings because my American family always hugs. They hug and kiss, and at first I felt really, really confused. But little by little, I began to feel more love and affection for them.
Uh-huh.
I started to feel really comfortable with that.
So it's really rubbed off on you? You enjoy hugging?
Yeah, I really like it. I had a funny experience recently.
Yeah?
I have a good friend in Japan. I was just back in Japan last month, and I was so happy to see her that I opened my arms like...
To give her a hug?
Yes, I just forgot. And her face, her expression was just... She was shocked and afraid, so...
That's funny.
Yeah, so I didn't hug her. But she was just accepted to nursing school in Japan, so I wrote and I told her that when she graduates, I am going to give her a big hug. And she wrote back, Heidi, I am looking forward to your hug.
Decoding the meaning of word stress. Page 109. 1.
He looked very uncomfortable, and I had obviously invaded his body bubble, his space.
Yeah. Huh. How about touch? Do Brazilians touch each other more than North Americans?
2.
Now this is touching between male and female?
Let's see. Yes, male, female, but I also think it's not uncommon for male friends to touch each other, say to put an arm around the shoulder or something.
3.
And little boys and girls, they have their first kiss when they're, 6 or 7. That's strange, too, because we never did anything like that until we were older.
4.
Huh. So you say your parents didn't hug or kiss him. Did they hug or kiss you?
5.
No, I think never. When I was a child, maybe she did.
6.
Now I can understand how my husband felt.
Yeah?
Yeah, since I came here, I've come to understand his feelings.
7.
And her face, her expression was she was shocked.
In your own voice, using comparison, contrast. Page 112. Marcos, 1.
Are there things that North Americans do differently from people in Brazil? For example, eye contact. Is that something you noticed?
Well, there is a big difference.
2.
That's not the way Brazilians wave.
3.
Marcos, do Brazilians stand close together when they're talking?
Oh, much closer than North Americans.
Sunran, 1.
I find Americans tend to make a lot of facial expressions when they talk.
2.
I think Koreans use less body language when they communicate.
3,
So, like, if I have a girlfriend, it's normal to walk around hand in hand or arm in arm. I did that a lot in Korea, but I can't do it here in the US.
Irie. 1,
Are there any differences in eye contact that you've noticed between Japan and the US?
No, I think it's almost the same.
2,
Americans use more like body language, like hand signals when they talk.
So gestures.
Yes, and they use different gestures, like this gesture for so-so, sort of. We don't have that in Japan.
So the gestures are different, but there are also more of them.
That's right.
Lecture. Mara Edelman. Nonverbal Communication. The Hidden Dimension of Communication. Before the lecture. Listening for stress and intonation. Page 114. Listen to each excerpt and mark your answers. 1,
How much of those expressions are conveyed through verbal communication? More often than not, our intense emotions are conveyed non-verbally.
2,
More often than not, our intense emotions are conveyed non-verbally through gestures, body position, facial expression, vocal cues, eye contact, use of space, and touching.
3,
Imagine what would happen if you don't understand this bubble. What might you experience? Possibly discomfort, irritation, maybe even anger.
4,
It could express affection, anger, playfulness, control, status. These are just a few functions of touch.
5,
In some cultures, it is common to see same-sex friends holding hands and embracing in public. This behavior is not interpreted as sexual. However, think about this behavior in some other cultures. Is it appropriate?
Lecture. Part 1. Sarcasm and Proxemics. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 116.
Today we're going to start looking at nonverbal language. Nonverbal communication has often been referred to as the hidden dimension of communication. Sometimes this dimension is so subtle that we do not even recognize the ways it shapes what we're saying or how people interpret our meaning. In fact, when you think about it, think of some of the emotions that you express in everyday life, like happiness, joy, sadness, and anger, irritation. How much of those expressions are conveyed through verbal communication? More often than not, our intense emotions are conveyed non-verbally through gestures, body position, facial expression, vocal cues, eye contact, use of space, and touching. Okay, now let me make 2 points about how nonverbal communication functions. One is, sometimes when we communicate, it may only be through the nonverbal cues. The nonverbal gesture carries all our meaning. But secondly, nonverbal cues also function to help us interpret the verbal message. And this is the point I want to focus on first, that nonverbal cues help interpret a verbal message. Where we see this really, in a very subtle way, is through the use of humor and sarcasm. You know, in humor and sarcasm, the verbal message, what is actually said, is only a small part of the message. It's often the nonverbal cues that signal, hey, how's this message to be taken? Seriously or not? I mean, do they really mean it, or are they joking? Take, for example, when an American sees a new style of clothing which they may not like, how they might signal that they don't like it. Well, they might say, oh, that's a good look. Well, okay, now if you're from a different culture, how do you know if they really mean it, or if they're being sarcastic and they really mean the opposite? Well, it's very difficult because it's the nonverbal cues, not the words, that are carrying the meaning here. It's usually the tone of voice or a facial expression. I guess this is why a lot of international students often tell me that it's humor that's the most difficult part of American culture to understand, and similarly when Americans go abroad. There is another area of nonverbal communication that is often overlooked, and in this case, the nonverbal gesture carries all the meaning, and that is proxemics. That's Proxemics. Proxemics refers to our personal space. You know, the anthropologist Edward Hall calls this personal space of ours our body bubbles. Body bubbles are interesting because they're very subtle. You hardly ever recognize them until someone pops your bubble. In other words, when somebody comes too close or violates your private space, you are suddenly conscious. You become conscious of the bubble. So what do you do when somebody pops your bubble? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you move away? Do you turn your position? Do you put your books in front of you? Do you suddenly close your jacket? We tend to adapt our body position when our bubbles get invaded. We see this in crowded elevators, for example. Body bubbles are influenced by many factors. How intimate is the relationship? What is the social context? A party or a bus? What is the gender relationship? However, a strong influence on body bubbles is culture. For example, in Latin American and Middle Eastern cultures, the kind of conversational space, the space between two people just engaged in everyday conversations, is relatively very close compared to Asian and American cultures. Imagine what would happen if you don't understand this bubble. What might you experience? Possibly discomfort, irritation, maybe even anger.
Lecture, Part 2. Touch. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 117.
And a third area of nonverbal communication, an area that's extremely powerful, where there are very strong norms, that's kind of social, unspoken social rules, strong norms that are easily violated, is the area of touching. Touch is one of the most sensitive areas of nonverbal communication because touch is never neutral. Take the case of shaking hands with someone. We never think of shaking hands as a form of touch. It seems almost like a ritual. But in fact, it's one of the major forms of touch between strangers. Now, in American culture, for example, we value firm handshakes. I mean, if a handshake is weak and limp, we might say he or she shakes hands like a fish. Touch is really amazing. It's very subtle and complex. Think for a moment about some of the functions of touch. What could it express? Well, it could express affection, anger, playfulness, control, status. These are just a few functions of touch. Two major influences on touching behavior. Think about your body bubbles again. One is gender, and the other is culture. We can see both influences of gender and of culture when we contrast same-sex touching. This would be touching between two men or between two women. In some cultures, it is common to see same-sex friends holding hands and embracing in public. This behavior is not interpreted as sexual. However, think about this behavior in some other cultures. Is it appropriate? Could it be taboo? I recall my own surprise. I remember when I was visiting in China, and I would see young men holding hands in the streets, and young women also. And at first, I was surprised, but I thought it was, very affectionate, very warm. So I decided that I was going to incorporate the same habit when I came back to the United States. So my sister and I started to hold hands in public, but we felt very awkward about it, and we stopped doing it. So you see, the norms for touching are very powerful. They're easy to violate, and as I discovered, they're difficult to change. That is why it is very important to understand what is appropriate touch and what is taboo in another culture. Last, I think we have to remember that even misinterpretations and confusion in nonverbal communication don't always end in serious misinterpretations or anger or alienation. They're oftentimes the source of a lot of humor, a lot of laughter, and a lot of camaraderie between people of different cultures.
Unit 4, Interpersonal Relationships. Chapter 7, Friendship. Getting Started. Listening for Specific Information. Page 128.
Otis, can you tell me the name of one of your good friends?
Gee, that's difficult. I have so many good friends.
Okay, tell me one.
Okay, Tom.
And when and where did you meet him?
At Yale in, I guess it was 1956. We were in the same class, and we had a lot of interests in common, like music.
David, who was one of your best friends?
Let's say Douglas.
And when and where did you meet him?
In college, we were both studying music.
And when was that?
Let's see, 1982.
Pam, can you name a good friend of yours?
One of my best friends is Jeanette.
And when and how did you get to be friends?
Back in 1981, I think, when we were in grade school. We were both social outcasts.
Yeah?
Yeah, we were both terrible at sports.
Tony, can you tell me the name of one of your best friends?
Hubert.
And how did you meet him?
We met in college. We were in classes together, and we just got to be good friends.
How long ago was this?
How long? 27 years.
Catherine, who would you say is one of your good friends?
Odette.
Okay, Odette. And when and where did you meet her?
I met her in graduate school. And that was, 1999.
Ruth, who's one of your best friends?
Oh, well, the first person that comes to mind is Esther.
How did you get to be friends?
Well, I met her in 1996 at my synagogue. I already knew about her from another friend, and when I met her, I just knew I wanted to be friends.
Interview, Part 1. Starting Friendships. Retelling. Page 130.
Catherine, how long have we known each other?
Let's see. We met when you interviewed me for a teaching job. Was it 7, 8 years ago?
Yeah, that's about right.
But we began to be friends. I think what might have started it was when I asked you a favor, which was to help me give my cat, Sophie, a flea bath.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was hard for me. It was hard for me to ask that kind of favor of someone I didn't know that well because, it seemed fairly bothersome, but it turned out to be kind of fun.
Yeah, it was fun. I still have the scars. And after that, we started to be good friends. One thing that I've realized about you is that you have a lot of close friends from, different periods in your life. How have your friendships gotten started?
Well, I'd say that most of my friendships have sprung from some kind of shared interest, either at work or school or somewhere else. I have made a lot of friends at work. I value work a lot, and I feel like I have a particular work ethic. And so if I'm working with other people who have the same work ethic, that, for me, is something very large that we have in common. It makes for a good base for a possible friendship. Or sometimes it's just that I have some sense of, yeah, this is a person that I'd like to get to know, because I heard them make a remark that I thought was funny or interesting.
You mentioned your friend Odette earlier. How did you two get to be friends?
Oh, well, let's see. I was going to graduate school, and I was taking a course in linguistics. And I noticed this other woman in the same class, and I really liked the way she looked, the way, And I remember thinking, oh, she's too cool. She would never want to be friends with someone like me. And I didn't talk to her because I was just so intimidated by her coolness. Oh, gosh. And then I think what happened, we were in a study group together and got a chance to talk. At some point, she revealed to me that she'd thought I was too cool for her, too. And we ended up being great friends. Yeah, and we realized that neither of us was that cool after all.
Interview, Part 2. Maintaining Friendships. Retelling. Page 131.
Catherine, you have quite a few long-distance friendships. How do you maintain them?
Yeah, well, friendship is very important to me. I think friendships need tending. I put a big value on being current with my friends, and that's something that's hard to do long distance. But there are friends I have that I don't live close to, that I have managed to stay very close to. My friend Odette lives back east, and we talk on the phone at least once a week, usually for an hour at a time. So I stay current with her, by talking.
So do you phone your other long-distance friends too?
Not so much. I use email with some of my friends, but I actually still love to write letters and get letters.
So snail mail.
Yeah, and I have one friend, Doug, that I've been exchanging letters with for more than 20 years, and it's a cool thing because I still have all of them.
Wow.
And so it's a concrete record of, of what we've been doing all these years.
Huh.
Yeah, we met when we were working at the same place. And then he went to Taiwan for 2 years, and we wrote letters. We didn't know each other all that well, but we got to know each other through letters over the first 2 years. And ever since then, we've been good friends.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's cool.
So, telephone, snail mail, email, what else?
Skype. My old friend Corey in Chicago, we used to talk on the phone, but now we Skype. He's actually the only friend I Skype with. And it's great because we'll be talking and he'll say something like, "You actually don't look bad for your age." And I recognize the room where he's sitting because I visited them. And his wife, Misayo, will walk through, and she'll stop and show me her knitting. And I'll show her what I'm working on, because I've just started getting into knitting. And then his dog, Peanut, will wander through. And I've met Peanut, so it's like I've just dropped in on them for a visit.
Interview, Part 3. What friends do for each other. Summarizing what you have heard. Page 131.
So, in your view, what is it that good friends do for each other, Catherine?
Well, I think I feel like one thing I want my friends to do is to call me on things, to let me know if I do something that upsets them for whatever reason. I think that's one thing friends, do for each other. And that's why sometimes friendship can get prickly and hard. And you can fight, but I've never felt fighting was bad. It's just showing that you care. But other things, I think friends provide comfort and support and adventure and jokes, especially with old friends. You share jokes that you've created together, that you've understood, and all you have to do is say one word, and the other person can go off into peals of laughter, and that's pretty,
It's powerful.
Yeah, it is. And it's a great way to mark time, I think, to realize that you've actually accrued this common
history.
Yeah.
How about more recent friendships?
Well, yeah, I should say my friendships have kind of shifted since my son Leo was born.
Yeah?
I've made a number of good friends. Being a parent is so all-consuming that it really bonds you with people who are going through the same experience.
Yeah.
So these friendships have become more the day-to-day focus of friendship for me.
Huh.
But I'm really happy for email and Skype and the phone and yeah, letters. So I can keep up with the friends that I've known for so long and have this great history with. I think of friends as the family that we get to choose. And that's why friendship's such a wonderful thing.
Interview, Part 3. What friends do for each other. Listening for verb tense and aspect. Page 132. 1.
And I was taking a course in linguistics, and I noticed this other woman in the same class.
2.
At some point, she revealed to me that she'd thought I was too cool for her, too, and we ended up being great friends.
3.
I have one friend, Doug, that I've been exchanging letters with for more than 20 years.
4.
His wife, Misayo, will walk through, and she'll stop and show me her knitting, and I'll show her what I'm working on.
5.
And you can fight, but I've never felt fighting was bad.
In your own voice, describing a typical scene and activities. Page 134.
And it's great because we'll be talking, and he'll say something like, "You actually don't look bad for your age." And I recognize the room where he's sitting because I visited them. And his wife, Misayo, will walk through, and she'll stop and show me her knitting, and I'll show her what I'm working on, and then his dog Peanut will wander through.
Lecture, Kenneth Warden, Looking at Friendship. Before the lecture, using morphology, context, and nonverbal cues to guess meaning. Page 137. 1.
But it's also rather subjective. Friendship means very different things to different people.
2.
As a therapist, I'm always thinking about a client's social network. Along with sleep patterns and appetite, this is an important indicator of a person's general functioning. When I work with a client who's suicidal, it's always critical to take into account that person's support systems. And by that, I'm talking about family and friends.
3.
You probably know of adults who consider themselves loners and say that they are content with that condition.
4.
There can be a lot of pain involved with friendship. It's a risky business. When we make friends, or try to make them, we become vulnerable to rejection. Each of us probably has a painful childhood memory of being cast aside by one friend in favor of another.
5.
You may have heard of the concept of the overscheduled child who is always busy, always going off to piano lessons or football practice or ballet class.
Lecture, Part 1. The Role of Friendship in Good Mental Health. Listening for specific information. Page 139.
In some respects, friendship seems like a very straightforward topic. Everyone wants friends. Most of us have friends. But it's also rather subjective. Friendship means very different things to different people. What I'll be focusing on today is the importance of friendship to me, as an individual and as a psychotherapist. And then on some ways in which friendship is challenged today. My first memory of consciously contemplating friendship was as a young boy. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I heard an old song on the radio. People. People who need people are the luckiest people in the world. And I remember thinking, is that really true? Do we need people? And is it okay to need people? And as I've gotten older, more and more, I tend to answer that question in the affirmative. As a therapist, I'm always thinking about a client's social network. Along with sleep patterns and appetite, this is an important indicator of a person's general functioning. When I work with a client who's suicidal, it's always critical to take into account that person's support systems. And by that, I'm talking about family and friends. Does that person feel supported in the world? Do they have meaningful connections? There are two reasons why I think about that. And the first one is, the person who does feel supported is much less likely to attempt suicide in the first place. Suicide is very often the manifestation of an abject sense of alienation. And second, if a person is suicidal, it's very important to hook them up with their support systems so that they can be monitored and kept safe. Someone without friends is almost certain to be depressed. You probably know of adults who consider themselves loners and say that they are content with that condition. My sense is that while that may in part be true, it's almost always the function of a defense mechanism. There can be a lot of pain involved with friendship. It's a risky business. When we make friends, or try to make them, we become vulnerable to rejection. Each of us probably has a painful childhood memory of being cast aside by one friend in favor of another. And that really hurts. Rejection by friends is especially painful for children. So many loners, after repeated rejection, adapt by consciously deciding not to get close to anyone. It's easier that way, and it's less painful. In effect, they're saying, if I tell you who I am, and you don't like who I am, that's all I got. So I don't want to take that chance. I don't want to let you know who I really am. And of course, it's impossible to form a friendship if you're isolating yourself from other people like this. To make friends, you have to run the risk of being rejected.
Lecture, Part 2, New Challenges to Friendship. Listening for specific information. Page 141.
I want to talk about some of the challenges to friendship that I see in modern life today. One has its roots in childhood, which of course is when we learn how to make friends. There has been a lot of study recently of how contemporary life affects children. You may have heard of the concept of the overscheduled child who is always busy, always going off to piano lessons or football practice or ballet class. Of course, activities are good, but children also need unstructured time. In a safe place, of course, where they can just hang out with their peers without tasks or deadlines. It is in those moments that a child can really get to know another child. And that is the basis of developing lifelong friendships. And, of course, the pressures of modern life have an impact on adult friendships as well. Ask a friend today, how are you? And odds are the answer will be, I'm so tired, or I'm much too busy, or both. People spend more time at work, and the result is less quality time with family and friends. We may say that friendship is the most important thing in life, but that doesn't prevent us from moving across the country to take a better job if we have the opportunity. Now, this brings me to another aspect of modern life that may influence friendships, and one that I find extremely interesting and at the same time worrisome. And that has to do with the impact that social networking has had on the way in which people conduct their friendships. Facebook, instant messaging, texting, Twitter. These forms of communication are replacing to a great extent the kind of contact that friendships used to rely on, face-to-face interaction. Go to any cafe or public place, and it seems like almost everyone is wired. They're using some kind of electronic means of communication, even if they are sitting with a group of friends. I mentioned earlier how mobility, for example, moving across the country for a new job, how that presents a huge challenge if we're trying to maintain a friendship. And in the past, it would probably have spelled the end of the friendship. Well, clearly, Facebook, Skype, instant messaging, all of these tools make it possible now to maintain long-distance relationships. You may have people yourself that you stay in close touch with using one of these tools. But let's look again at these people texting in a cafe. We call this social connectivity. And it's true that you can connect instantly with someone thousands of miles away. But it is not clear what the quality of that connection is, whether it can truly be called an intimate friendship. I'm not saying these social networking tools are bad, and I think they can be vital to sustaining an existing friendship. But as far as making new friends, well, think about this verb that we use on Facebook, friending, to friend. Just how meaningful is it to say, I have 683 friends on Facebook? Are they really friends? In conclusion, in terms of human history, social networking is a relatively recent phenomenon. So we do not know what impact it will have on the nature of friendship. But I think it is safe to assume that friendship will survive. We are by nature social animals. We all want and need people in our lives that accept us and love us for who we are. The people we love and who love us back are our friends.
Unit 4, Interpersonal Relationships. Chapter 8, Love. Getting started. Listening for details. Page 145. 1.
My name is Les. I'm a librarian. I'm divorced and in my late 30s. I enjoy listening to jazz and going to movies, museums, that kind of thing. I'm looking for someone who kind of likes the same things, I guess.
2.
My name is Michael. I'm a doctor and I work very hard. I like to climb mountains in my spare time. I'm 35 years old and I'd like to meet an attractive younger woman.
3.
My name is Alicia. I want to meet a kind, dependable man who will be a good father to my 2 children, who are 4 and 6 years old. I'm a computer engineer.
4.
My name's Frank. I'm a junior high school teacher. When I'm off in the summer, I love to garden and play baseball. I'm 37 years old.
5.
My name is Sarah, and I'm an artist. I'm in my early 40s. I guess I'm kind of shy, but I'd like to meet someone I can talk to about art and books, things like that.
6.
I'm Suzanne, and I'm really into the healthy lifestyle. I'm in my mid-20s, but I'm looking for a more mature man who makes good money and everything.
Interview, Part 1. Courtship. Listening for specific information. Page 147.
Anne, how long have you been married?
33 years. 33 years, right?
That's right.
And that's a long time.
It is a long time.
So I wanted to ask you, how did you initially get interested in each other?
We met when I was a senior in college, and Anne was a senior in high school. And she lived in a small town about 7 miles from where I was studying, and I was attending the same little country church where she and her family went, and that's how we met.
Uh-huh.
So, Anne, you were a high school senior.
That's right. I was 16.
Here was this older man.
I was 16 years old, and I just thought he was the best person I'd ever met in my life. I just fell head over heels in love with him immediately at age 16. But at age 16, you usually fall head over heels in love with a lot of people. But this one stuck, and I had to wait 11 years before he actually proposed and we got married, which is kind of a long time.
Yeah.
But at age 16, I certainly wasn't ready to get married anyway. One of my greatest fears after I met him and decided pretty much then and there that he was the man I wanted to marry. But my greatest fear was that he would marry my sister, who was 3 years older than I am and therefore more his age. And I was so relieved when my sister married someone else.
Now, did Jim give you any encouragement? 11 years, that's a long time to wait.
Very little.
Well, Jim, were you as interested in Anne from the beginning as she was in you?
Yes, I was, but I wasn't very good at showing it, I think, sometimes. And I really realized after I finished medical school and I was doing my internship out in Seattle.
Now, this was 10 years after we met.
That there was a big hole in my life, and I realized what that hole was. That I didn't have Anne with me. And so I came to New York while Anne was getting her master's degree at Columbia. She'd just come back from 2 years in the Peace Corps in Ethiopia. And I brought many pictures of Seattle to show her, because I understood she was considering a job in Philadelphia teaching when she finished. So I brought all these pictures of Seattle, what a beautiful place it is, and to encourage her that this was where she should come, and
A rather oblique proposal.
Kind of oblique. But then the next spring, I was visiting back in New York, and I got a call from this wonderful older lady in our church. Aunt Amy was her name, or that's what everyone called her. And Aunt Amy called up and she said, "If you're really interested in that Anne, you'd better get yourself down here, because she might go off and marry one of the Peace Corps people she worked with."
That's true.
Well, I got right in the car, and I drove 67 miles down to her home, and I asked her mother. Her father had died some years before, and I asked her mother for permission to...
This is true.
To have Anne's hand, and she was very...
She was very happy.
Very pleased. And then I proposed to Anne.
And Anne was very happy.
Anne was very happy.
And I was very happy.
Yeah.
It was a long time coming, but it was very much worth the wait. But I realized that there were several times when I came very close to marrying someone else, and I feel very fortunate that I
Yeah, that you waited.
Yeah.
Now complete the steps in your book. Interview, Part 2. Making Marriage Work. Listening for specific information. Page 147.
I think one of the really nice things about our relationship and our marriage has been that from the very beginning, it never was all me or all Anne. There were so many things that we had both done. Whenever we went out, it'd be, "Well, tell me about the time you went looking for elephants in Ethiopia." And she would remember something to ask me to tell friends, and we were both proud of what each other had done. So it wasn't a one-sided kind of thing. And that's been the way it's been through the 33 years, too. I think that both of us have been not only husband and wife, but also best friends, and proud of each other.
Uh-huh. And we share a lot of interests. I think that's one of the things that's made our marriage very, very strong.
What interests, for example?
Well, classical music. We love going to concerts.
Cross-cultural living, learning the history and learning some of the language, and we've worked in places all over the world.
And we both love outdoors and gardening, walking. We both come from very strong, very loving families, and our families are very important to us. And our faith is very important to us. Our involvement in our church, and just the way we see people, and the way we like people to be treated, and caring for others, and that kind of thing.
Uh-huh. In what way do you think you complement each other? I mean, do you have differences that work to your advantage?
Anne does the financial management for our family. If I did, I think we'd both be in jail by now because I hate paying bills and keeping records. And Anne is very meticulous about it. She also has a phenomenal record of our 30 years together.
She's the historian.
And they're all cataloged neatly in albums where they can be seen, not stuck in drawers, which is what I would do. And it's wonderful because friends will come from 10 years ago and we'll pull out an album and it'll have pictures that they remember. It's very meaningful. And that's a talent I don't have at all.
I think that there's several things that make our marriage very special and I think strengthen almost any relationship. And one is, I think Jim has alluded to it before, respect for each other. We both respect what the other does, and we're committed to our marriage. And we give each other space when we need to have time alone, but then we love to be together. We just love to spend time being in each other's company. We enjoy each other. At least I enjoy being with you.
Definitely I enjoy being with you.
Yeah. Can you think of experiences over the years that have particularly bonded you?
Oh, yes.
Working overseas.
Living in a tent for 3 months.
In the desert in Somalia.
That was a fairly bonding experience. And of course, our 2 children have bonded us.
Oh, yeah.
Now, did you know before you got married how many kids you wanted to have?
We knew that we wanted to have children. We didn't talk numbers, except I remember somewhere thinking that maybe 6 would be nice.
6?
I remember.
And then we thought maybe 4, and then after we had 2 boys, we decided that 2 was just fine. But that was a bonding experience, raising our 2 sons, going through being parents for them as young children, and the teenage years, which were not necessarily the happiest of times.
They were challenging.
And now our sons are old enough so that we treat each other as equals. All 4 of us are adults now, so when we get together, it's just a wonderful adult-to-adult relationship.
Interview, Part 2. Making Marriage Work. Listening for digressions. Page 149. 1.
I just fell head over heels in love with him immediately at age 16. But at age 16, You usually fall head over heels in love with a lot of people, but this one stuck, and I had to wait 11 years before he actually proposed and we got married, which is kind of a long time. But at age 16, I certainly wasn't ready to get married anyway.
2.
One of my greatest fears after I met him and decided pretty much then and there that he was the man I wanted to marry. But my greatest fear was that he would marry my sister, who was 3 years older than I am and therefore more his age. And I was so relieved when my sister married someone else.
3.
But then the next spring, I was visiting back in New York, and I got a call from this wonderful older lady in our church. Aunt Amy was her name, or that's what everyone called her. And Aunt Amy called up, and she said, if you're really interested in that Anne, you'd better get yourself down here, because she might go off and marry one of the Peace Corps people she worked with.
4.
Well, I got right in the car, and I drove 67 miles down to her home, and I asked her mother, her father had died some years before, and I asked her mother for permission to...
This is true.
...to have Anne's hand.
In your own voice, showing interest, page 154.
33 years. 33 years, right?
That's right.
And that's a long time.
It is a long time. And I had to wait 11 years before he actually proposed and we got married, which is kind of a long time.
Yeah.
There were several times when I came very close to marrying someone else, and I feel very fortunate that
Yeah, that you waited.
Yeah. We share a lot of interests. I think that's one of the things that's made our marriage very, very strong.
What interests, for example?
Well, classical music. We love going to concerts. We knew that we wanted to have children. We didn't talk numbers, except I remember somewhere thinking that maybe 6 would be nice.
6?
I remember.
Lecture. Dr. Robert Atkins. Love. What's it all about? Before the lecture. Taking advantage of rhetorical questions. Page 156. 1.
Why do you fall in love with one person but not another person?
2.
A lot of people might like a 10, but if you're a 5, then who are you going to end up getting married to?
3.
If she graduated from graduate school and he flunked out of kindergarten, do you think that relationship is going to last very long?
4.
Same age or about? Now, what's kind of the accepted age range?
5.
Now, what about the idea that opposites attract?
6.
You know that story of Romeo and Juliet?
Taking advantage of rhetorical questions. Page 156. 1.
Why do you fall in love with one person but not another person? Well, the sociobiology people, they would tend to say that you fall in love unconsciously with somebody that's a good genetic match or something like that.
2.
A lot of people might like a 10, but if you're a 5, then who are you going to end up getting married to? Well, probably someone closer to a 5.
3.
If she graduated from graduate school and he flunked out of kindergarten, do you think that relationship is going to last very long? Probably not.
4.
Same age or about? Now, what's kind of the accepted age range? Usually 5 to 10 years, with exceptions, of course.
5.
Now, what about the idea that opposites attract? And you've probably heard that. That's kind of the complementary theory, or complementarity.
6.
You know that story of Romeo and Juliet? You know, their families hated each other. And they said, you stay away from him, you stay away from her.
Lecture, Part 1. The Matching Hypothesis. Outlining Practice. Page 158.
This seems to be one of the more difficult topics to discuss. What is this thing called love? It seems everybody has a different idea about love. Why do you fall in love with one person but not another person? Well, the sociobiology people, they would tend to say that you fall in love unconsciously with somebody that's a good genetic match or something like that. Boy, she'll produce nice kids, so I love her. Now, sometimes women like guys that are tall and muscular. Well, the sociobiologists would say that, well, they would produce a good, gene pool. That's why we like tall, muscular types, or something like that. Now, even though you might like somebody and you say, wow, she's beautiful, she's definitely a 10. A lot of people might like a 10, but if you're a 5, then who are you going to end up getting married to? Well, probably someone closer to a 5. We tend to marry people like that. People that are like we are. We tend to really like people that are like we are. And that's homogeneity or similarity. Some people call this the matching hypothesis, that we tend to be attracted to somebody that's like us. In fact, you're apt to stay married too if you're married to somebody that's like you are. Of course, the matching part is more than just the physical. Maybe you've seen a couple walking down the street and said, wow, what is she doing with him? Maybe she's a 10 and he's a 3 or something, or the other way around. And what that is, that's when you match up with someone. First you notice the physical package, but then you start adding things in, like their personality, their job, their intelligence, and maybe when you look at the total, you might decide that they're a good match for you, even if physically maybe they're not. What else? Like, let's see what would be some things that one would be the same educational background. If she graduated from graduate school and he flunked out of kindergarten, do you think that relationship is going to last very long? Probably not. Like, for example, I recall one student in a 4-year college a long time ago that she didn't go on to graduate school because she was afraid it would break up the marriage. And he'd only graduated from high school. She's graduated from college, and he kept bugging her about being a college graduate. You're so smart. Why don't you do it? Right? Well, you're the college-educated one. That sort of thing. So she didn't want to have even more of a gap, so she actually stayed down. And you might say because he didn't want to go up. Now, that's kind of too bad. So, we tend to marry somebody similar in education. Often you met them in school. What else should they be the same about? Interests. You'd have about the same interests often, so what else? Maybe the same values? Okay. Same religion? Maybe. Same race? Same age or about? Now, what's kind of the accepted age range? Usually 5 to 10 years, with exceptions, of course. But usually within 5 to 10 years. What else would there be? Socioeconomic status, age, education, race, religion, values, interests, things like that.
Lecture, Part 2. The Matching Hypothesis, continued, and other theories. Outlining practice, page 159.
Okay, so generally the more similar you are, the more apt you are to stay married. And that really works. But you might say, well, gee, Bob, I'm a guy who flunked kindergarten and my wife has a graduate degree. Or my mom has a degree and my dad never graduated high school. Or what? I don't know, he's Catholic and she's Jewish. Or she's 23 and he's 42. Or whatever it might be. And hey, they've been doing fine. That could be. But as a general rule, the more different you are in these, it just increases your probability of getting a divorce. We also tend to find people who have similar politics to what we have. If you're liberal, you'll tend to marry someone that's liberal. Or conservative will marry a conservative because you don't want to marry someone that keeps telling you you're wrong. So we also marry someone who sort of validates our ideas. We're kind of psychologically comfortable with those people. And as I said, these marriages have a greater chance of lasting. Now, what about the idea that opposites attract? And you've probably heard that. That's kind of the complementary theory, or complementarity. I don't know why it is academics try to make big words out of little words. Instead of the difference theory, they say the complementary theory or complementarity or something like that. But anyway, difference. Well, that could work for magnets. With people, difference is not. It doesn't work as well as similarity does, but it can be a factor. Like if one person is dominant, are they better off with another dominant person, or are they better off with the person that's more submissive, that likes people telling them what to do? Probably a dominant person is more apt to marry a submissive person. And maybe he or she likes the other person to be dominant, and that works out okay. So there is something to that. Probably two dominants don't work well. Or maybe two submissives don't work well. What do you want to do? I don't know, whatever. What do you want to do? I don't know, whatever. So probably won't work too well. But in general, the research that we have says that people that marry someone that's like they are tend to stay together. One other factor that can bring a couple together is called the Romeo and Juliet effect. You know that story of Romeo and Juliet? Their families hated each other. And they said, you stay away from him. You stay away from her. So what did Romeo and Juliet do? Yeah, they got married. So the Romeo and Juliet theory says the more opposition you face to a relationship from parents or friends or whoever, the more attractive that relationship is to you. The more people say, don't, you shouldn't, the more you want to do it. Pretty interesting, huh? And it turns out these couples usually stay together too. So, those are some of the things that bring people together. And probably the most important thing to remember is the similarity idea, that we tend to be attracted to and happy with people who are like us.